Mom, take a blanket down to the storage room. We have guests tonight. Don't embarrass us. My son said it without looking at me. His tone as harsh as if he were ordering a maid. His wife stood by the kitchen counter, arms folded, adding one more cut. That room is big enough for one old lady. I went numb in the upscale apartment I'd bought with my husband's life insurance, the place that had once been our shared dream. A peaceful home where you can live in safety. But now, my son had turned it into a stage to humiliate his own mother. I didn't cry. I set my teacup down, looked him straight in the eyes, and said quietly, "All right." When the basement door clicked shut, I opened the lid of a small metal box hidden behind the storage bins. Inside were a camera, a copy of the condo contract, and a USB recorder. Tonight they thought they'd pushed me to the bottom of the house, but this is exactly where I would start climbing back to the top of my life. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Audrey Whitmore, 67, widowed for almost 2 years. I spent my life as a bookkeeping secretary at a small insurance company in Charlotte. Careful, quiet work, just like me. I'm not wealthy, but I get by. I'm not fearless, but I'm steady enough to withstand life's stormy seasons. I have one son, Brandon, the person I once believed was the last bright part of my world after my husband died. I used to think I was a good mother, a fortunate woman with a family. But today, standing in the apartment I bought with my husband's life insurance and hearing my son tell me to sleep in the storage room, I realized this. Sometimes you don't truly know who you are until your own blood tests your dignity. After Gil, my husband, passed, the house we'd lived in for 35 years turned cold, like a museum of memories. Every morning, I still brewed 2 cups of coffee, then remembered there was only one person left to drink. Every evening, the empty, wooden chair at the table reminded me that the only person who ever looked at me with gratitude was gone for good. I'm 67. At this age, people learn to slow down, but loneliness never does. It threads through every breath. 3 months after the funeral, Gil's lawyer called. He had left me $600,000 in life insurance, an amount I could barely imagine. Gil had kept it quiet, maybe so I wouldn't worry. I cried, but they were the first warm tears I'd shed in months. I thought, maybe he was still trying to protect me, even from far away. I spent weeks thinking. Then one March morning, I stood before a map of North Carolina and set my hand on Charlotte, the city where we dreamed of living in retirement. I remembered what Gil always said. A small condo near downtown, a balcony with nightlights. When we're older, all you need is a place to sit and breathe free. I smiled and whispered to his photo, "All right, I'll do it for both of them. Us." 3 weeks later, I signed for a 2-bedroom condo in a new building in South End, quiet but close enough to downtown. Price: $400,000, including access to a pool, a gym, a private parking space, and a roomy storage area in the basement. I had $200,000 left, enough for upgrades and a cushion for old age. On key day, my hands shook. Sunlight poured into the rooms at noon, and I felt as if Gil were standing there, smiling gently. "Well done, Audrey. You finally did what you deserve." I picked every item myself: cream curtains, a brown fabric sofa, a vase of lavender. Everything in that condo held a piece of our memories. I called my son, excited. "Brandon, I've got great news. I just bought a new condo. You and Tessa will love it." Silence for a few seconds, then his voice strange and cold. "With Dad's insurance money, right?" I hesitated. "Yes, Gil. Left it for me." "And you spent $400,000 on that?" "Yes, but there's still $200,000 for a scamly." He cut me off. "Did you ever think to ask me first?" "Ask you?" "This was your father's money. He left it to me." A hard breath on the other end, then a hang-up. I stood there listening to the long tone in a kitchen that still smelled of fresh paint. It felt like I'd lost something deeper than money, the little boy who once held my hand on his first day of school. 3 days later, the phone rang while I was arranging the living room. Brandon. His voice sounded softer, but there was something false in the sweetness. "Are you home this weekend, Mom?" "Yes, are you coming by?" "Yeah." Tessa wants to bring her parents and a few friends to see the place. They want to tour it. "And you can stay, but there's one thing." "What thing?" I asked. "Could you move down to the storage room in the basement for a few days?" I thought I misheard. "The storage room? Are you joking?" "No, Mom, just a few days. The condo feels smaller than the photos. Tessa doesn't want guests to see you living with us. They might think we can't afford to take care of you." I went numb. "Are you afraid people will think I'm poor?" Brandon lowered his voice. "I just need you to be reasonable. Don't let anyone see that you're old and still, clinging to us." I sat down, gripping the phone. "Brandon, this is my place. I bought it with the money your father left." He paused, then spoke slowly. "Exactly. It was my father's money, and I'm the legal heir. Don't forget that." He hung up. That night I sat alone in a home that still smelled of new wood, feeling both hurt and hollow. I had lost my husband, and now I might be losing my son. But instead of crying, I turned on the lamp and opened a notebook. I wrote one line: "No one gets to steal your dignity, not even your own child." The next morning, I started moving. I bought a mini camera and hid it behind a vase on the TV console, connected to my phone. I photographed every document, purchase contract, bank transfers, and saved them to the cloud. I was no longer the woman who bowed her head for fear of losing family. I understood now. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd use my head, not my tears. That afternoon, Tessa texted, "Please don't go on about the price. My parents think the condo's about $650,000. Just say that it sounds better. Thanks in advance." I looked at the message, my heart stinging even as a smile formed. I took a screenshot, evidence number 2. They seemed to have forgotten I'd been a bookkeeping secretary for more than 30 years. I understand the value of paperwork and how to use it when it counts. 2 days before they arrived, I did what Brandon asked. I tidied the basement storage room. It was small, with bare concrete walls and weak yellow light, but clean. There was an outlet and an internal landline connected to the condo upstairs. When I lifted the receiver to test it, I heard the dial tone. It still worked. I laughed softly. It could be a lifeline, or a line that ties someone down. I set a wooden chair, a light blanket, and our wedding photo on a little table. "If you won't protect yourself, don't blame them for treating you poorly," Gil used to say. I looked at his picture and nodded. The next evening, I heard a knock. Brandon walked in wearing a crisp shirt, but his voice was dry. "Is the room ready?" "Yes." "If you embarrass us, I'll put you in a nursing home. Don't try anything." I didn't answer. I slid my hand into my pocket where a tiny recorder was glowing. "Are you finished?" I asked, barely above a breath. "Yeah." "Then so am I." He left and the door slammed. Footsteps faded up the stairs. I stood in that small room, drew a deep breath, and hit record again. I looked around the cold walls, the metal box, Gil's photo. And I knew, from the darkest corner of this home, I would start lighting my life again. I don't even know why I picked up the landline that day. Maybe it was the habit of a former bookkeeper always checking whether things work. The morning was quiet. Sunlight fell across the small table in the storage room I'd turned into a temporary bed. On the shelf sat a thermos of coffee and Gil's photo, his kind smile telling me to stay calm. I meant only to dust the wall phone and see if it worked. But as my hand touched the receiver, I heard a soft click, and then a familiar voice, my son's. "Did you finish the checks?" Brandon said, voice low. "Done," Tessa replied, almost eager. I told my parents the condo's worth $650,000. My dad even said you have a good eye. I froze. 650,000? I gripped the receiver, terrified but silent. Brandon gave a short laugh. Good. Let them think that. Can't have them knowing my mother bought it cheap. They'd say, I'm not capable. I know, Tessa said, her voice light as silk and sharp as a blade. Pratt men have pride. My dad always told me, don't marry a man who can't afford a proper home. Brandon paused, then sighed. That's why I need that number. Don't let them doubt anything. I leaned against the wall, forcing down the tremor. So that 650,000 Tessa told me to repeat was just a small piece of a bigger plan, a full script to turn this condo into theirs. Still holding the receiver, my heart pounding, I heard Tessa again slow, calculating. What about the old woman? We can't let your mother stay here forever. I can't stand pretending she's the owner. Brandon gave the same sly laugh I'd heard when he was a child caught lying. I'm on it. I have a cousin who's a psychiatrist. He owes me a favor $5,000 and he'll sign off that my mother has cognitive decline. Then we can petition the court for guardianship. My hand turned cold, fingers numb. And then? Tessa asked, as if discussing a simple purchase. Then, Brandon said, we'll sell the condo and move her to a cheap nursing home out in the suburbs. Trust me, those places only need a few months and that's it. Older folks don't handle being yanked from their environment. They go downhill fast. Tessa let out a thin laugh that turned my blood to ice. You're cruel. No, Brandon said softly. I'm practical. My father was too soft. I'm not. I pressed the receiver tighter, barely breathing. Each word pricked like a needle. Tessa asked, You're sure she suspects nothing? Not a thing, Brandon said, smug. She still thinks I'm the dutiful son. I could take everything and she'd apologize if I raised my voice. Tessa giggled. That's insane. What mother could be that blind? She's always been that way, Brandon said. Her whole life. I set the receiver down very slowly, afraid a sound would give me away. I shook all over, but no tears came. In my mind, I heard Gil's voice from years ago. You're stronger than you think, Audrey, but only when you're pushed to the wall do you learn you can stand. Now I understood. I sat in the old wooden chair, my fingers finding the tiny recorder in my pocket. I hit record, repeating exactly what they'd said, every detail, every number, every step. Then I photographed the wall clock proof of the call time. I saved everything carefully. The shaking stopped. A cold clarity took over. About an hour later, when I stepped out of that basement room, I saw Brandon and Tessa strolling the lobby with her parents, hand in hand, smiling like model spouses. I walked by quietly with a trash bag so they wouldn't notice. Tessa glanced at me, a stiff smile. Hi, Mom. Is it okay down there? I left some extra blankets for you. I nodded and smiled. Thank you. It's very quiet. Good, she said lightly, turning to her mother. She's a bit sensitive, but very sweet. Everyone laughed. Glassware clinked. I kept walking, saying nothing. Each step sealed another door inside me, the door of trust, of motherhood, of hope. That night I sat at the small desk in the basement, opened my laptop, and copied the recording to a USB labeled Conversation, Proof 1. I photographed the call log from the internal phone and emailed it to myself. I was grateful for my cautious nature, the same habit coworkers once teased as the double-check lady. Turns out, it's what was saving me. A draft slipped under the basement door, and the night air felt dry and cold. I pulled on a sweater, my eyes landing on Gil's photo. I spoke softly, as if he could still hear. See that? They want everything. But I won't make it easy. In my mind, I knew exactly who to call, someone I trusted, someone who had never failed me. Naomi Brooks. Naomi and I had been friends since our 20s. We once worked at the same company, quick, tough, and a believer in justice. Later, she went to law school and became a civil attorney focusing on elder rights. We hadn't seen each other in years, but her number stayed in my phone as if my heart knew I would need her someday. I called. Her voice was warm and steady, just like before. "Goodness, Audrey, it's been ages. Are you okay?" I paused, holding back a sob. "Naomi, I need to see you, as soon as possible." Hearing my shaking voice, she turned serious. "What happened?" "I can't say over the phone. Just know, someone is trying to take my home. Someone in the family." Silence on the line. Then Naomi spoke, firm and low. "Listen to me, Audrey. Do not say another word to them. Stay quiet and gather everything: texts, recordings, documents. Don't react, don't get angry, don't cry. I'll drive to Charlotte in the morning. Understood?" I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Thank you, Naomi." "No thanks needed," she said gently. "From now on, you're not alone." After we hung up, I sat a long time, listening to the clock tick. Far-off traffic hummed like a memory. The basement room felt less tight. I drew a deep breath and closed my eyes. In the dark, Gil's voice came back. "You're stronger than you think." I smiled faintly. "Yes, I am stronger than I think." And this time, I would prove it not with tears, but with the truth. I didn't sleep that night. Brandon and Tessa's voices still echoed like a tunnel, every word of their plan to strip me of everything. Near dawn, I got up, turned on the lamp, and chose something I'd never dared before: face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. In a steel case I'd brought from the old house, there was a small black lockbox. Gil had told me, "Keep it in case you ever need it." He used to store important papers there: insurance, savings certificates, even a few unsigned will drafts. I hadn't opened it since he died. But that morning, with first light slipping under the basement door, I felt I had to. I pulled the box out, wiped the thin layer of dust, and slid in the tiny key I still kept on Gil's old keyring. A soft click, and the lid lifted. Inside were neatly stacked folders, Gil's familiar tidy handwriting on each cover. One made my heart seize: "Brandon, Confidential." I sat down, hands trembling, and turned the pages. Printed emails, handwritten notes, a few yellowed receipts. My eyes froze on the first line of one email. "Dad, please help me this one last time. Just 10,000. I promise I'll pay it back in 6 months. Below it, Gil's reply in blue ink. "Brandon, this is the 5th time this year. Tell me the truth, what is going on?" I read on. The next pages tracked every amount. April 2018, $8,000. Co-worker's investment. September 2018, $12,000. Tessa's hospital. February 2019, $15,000. Short-term loan real estate project. August 2020, $20,000. Startup investment. And most recent, just months before Gil died, $35,000. Urgent loan. More than $90,000 in total taken from Gil's savings and stock sales, with promises to pay it back. On the last page, Gil had written, "Brandon, I love you, but you're pushing this too far. If there's a next time, I'll have to tell your mother." Under that line was a hurried strike-through, then a smaller line in a shaky hand. "No, I won't tell her. He's still our son." I set the paper down, my heart gripped tight. There was more. At the end of the folder was a sealed letter addressed to me. "Audrey, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there." I sat, still for a long while, then opened it. Gil's voice flowed through my mind as if he were speaking. "Audrey, I didn't hide this because I feared your anger. I feared your pain. Brandon isn't the boy you remember. He has lied, used me, even threatened me when I refused. I stayed quiet because I was afraid he'd hurt you. But I also fear that when I'm gone, you'll face him alone. If that day comes, please don't be blind. Remember, you're stronger than you think." I folded the letter, tears falling onto the desk. Gil must have sensed it all. He knew what our son was becoming, but kept silent so I could live in the illusion that our family was still whole. For the first time, I wasn't crying from grief. I was crying because I'd woken up. I looked at our wedding photo. "You're right, Gil," I whispered. "A mother's love can't stay blind forever." The next morning, Naomi arrived. In a brown coat and carrying a worn leather case, she hugged me lightly. "Where do we start?" I handed her, Brandon, confidential. She read quietly for a long time. The eyes of an experienced attorney rarely show surprise, but they still showed sorrow. "How long have you had this?" "Since Gil died." I never opened it. Naomi nodded. "Good. We can prove Brandon exploited his father financially and abused his trust." She photographed each page and backed them up to her firm's secure server. "This is called sealing electronic evidence. If anyone tries to erase or tamper with it, we still have the originals." I nodded, both relieved and bitter. Her careful steps felt like placing my life back into order after years of being dismissed. She opened a notebook and made a list. Door camera, hall camera, a mic in the storage room, you can buy them, and I'll help you register them for lawful use. And remember, don't confront. Let them expose themselves. I stared, half in awe. "Do you handle this often?" "Audrey. Plenty of older folks lose everything with a few signatures. You're lucky you have evidence, clarity, and me." We both smiled. For the first time in days, my chest felt lighter. Naomi told me to get an independent appraisal so the true $400,000 purchase price was documented. When it goes to court, they can't twist it. I booked Gil's old appraisal company for the weekend. Then Naomi suggested we go on offense not by suing right away, but by putting them under the light, invite them to dinner, willingly, let them perform their roles. We'll let them reveal themselves. I hesitated. "You think they'll come?" Naomi smiled. "People who believe they hold power always show up. Trust me." That night, I drafted the invite, hands steady. "Dear Tessa, I'd like to invite you, Brandon, and your parents to dinner this weekend. I want to thank everyone for helping me settle in. I'll make a few of Gil's favorite dishes." I didn't expect a quick reply, but 10 minutes later Tessa wrote, "That's perfect, Mom. I'll tell Brandon. My parents will be thrilled. Can I bring 2 other couples to make it cozier?" I chuckled at the word cozier. Yes, it would be warm, but the fire wouldn't come from the stove. It would come from the truth waiting to flare on the table. Before bed, I arranged everything. The original purchase contract into a clear sleeve labeled property proof, the recorded call onto a fresh USB labeled recording one. All of it tucked into a blue hard folder the same shade as Gil's favorite shirt. I looked at that folder and whispered, "This time, I won't let anyone trample what you left. I promise." Then I turned off the light and leaned back, listening to the basement door whisper with the night breeze. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not because I had won, but because I wasn't afraid to lose anymore. In the dark, the tiny camera LED glowed. Read everything was ready. The dinner they thought would be a party. For me, it would be a closed courtroom where every lie would be brought into the light. End of part 3, 1,340 words. I never imagined I'd prepare a dinner like this. Not for family, but for people who see me as a thing already traded. That afternoon, Charlotte's sunlight was gentle and gold through the kitchen glass, the kitchen I once dreamed of using to cook for Gil every morning. But today, that room echoed with my son Brandon's voice, barking orders one by one like a supervisor. "The chicken needs to be marinated more, Mom. Tessa's dad doesn't like bland food." Then, "The mashed potatoes must be really smooth, you know how picky they are." I just nodded, gently stirring the sauce. In the oven door's reflection, I caught my own eyes calm in a strange way. Tessa walked in wearing a cream silk dress and a pearl necklace, her voice sweet but her tongue sharp. "Don't forget to sprinkle black pepper on the salad. Last time you forgot the salt and the guests almost had to add it themselves." I gave a thin smile. "I remember. I won't forget anything this time." She glanced at me with a peculiar satisfaction, as if every cutting remark made her feel more powerful. Around 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. Brandon straightened his tie and turned to me. "Mom, step aside so we can welcome our guests." I moved back toward the kitchen and quietly watched the door open. Tessa's father, Leonard Pratt, came in first, tall, short silver hair, a stern face. He'd been a federal judge, retired for a few years. Beside him was his wife, Elaine, a fuller-figured woman with the calm air of the upper class. Behind them were two couples, business friends of the Pratt family, all polished and self-assured. The apartment glowed, hard-soled shoes clicked, perfume floated in the air. Tessa opened her arms. "Mom, Dad, this is our new home. Isn't it beautiful?" Leonard nodded. "Quite impressive. It's rare to find somewhere this quiet so close to downtown." I heard Brandon laugh. "We bought it for $650,000. Good asset, good location, worth every penny." That sentence cut into me like a blade. We bought. This condo was Gil's last dream, the place where I wanted to keep what was left of his memory. And now my son used it to show off, to lie in front of strangers. They walked into the living room, praising the rug, admiring the new chandelier Tessa bought with my credit card. I just kept setting the table. My hands sliced cake and ladled sauce with steady rhythm, but my heart had gone cold. Dinner began. They sat around the 8-seat dining table while I stood by, serving like a waiter. Brandon raised a glass of red wine, voice booming. "Thank you, Mom and Dad, and everyone, for celebrating with us. This condo is a big milestone, and partly thanks to my Branded mother. Even though her health hasn't been great lately, she still tried to tidy up and cook. We're very grateful." Polite applause. Pitying eyes turned toward me. Tessa added, her tone gentle but loaded. "Mom's a little forgetful, but she loves us very much. This place is close to the hospital, so it's convenient if anything needs checking." I set down the chicken and lifted my head. "You're right," I smiled. I remember the route to the hospital very clearly, thanks to a memory that's still pretty good. No one caught the meaning, only Tessa shot Brandon a look, her lip twitching. They went on eating, laughing, talking stocks and travel. I stood still, listening to lies about me. Brandon told them he had helped Mom buy this condo because she doesn't understand paperwork, and that all maintenance and property taxes were in his name. One of Pratt's friends said, "So dutiful." "Not many kids do that." Brandon gave a smug smile. "I'm just doing what a son should. My mother is a bit confused sometimes, so I have to watch over things." I drew a slow breath to stay steady. I had been waiting for this moment. When Leonard set down his glass, I stepped closer with a blue file folder in hand. "Sorry to interrupt," I said evenly. "I'd like to say a few words." The room went still. All eyes turned to me. Brandon frowned. "Mom, we're just a few minutes," I cut in, "because there seems to be some misunderstanding about this condo." I set the folder on the table. "This is the original purchase contract, price $400,000, paid from my account, not anyone else's. Included are the tax receipts and the wire confirmations from Regions Bank." People glanced at each other. Leonard raised an eyebrow. Tessa went pale. I continued, still calm. "And this," I pulled out a small USB, "is a recording of Brandon and Tessa discussing how to declare me incompetent, petition for guardianship, and sell this condo. They even discussed the price and the facility they plan to put me in, a cheap nursing home in the suburbs." A spoon clinked hard against a plate. Brandon shot up. "What are you talking about?" You're making this up. Sit down, Brandon, Leonard said, low and firm. I nodded to him. Thank you, Judge Pratt. I took out my phone and played the audio. Brandon's voice rang out clearly. My cousin will sign that she's not competent, then we sell the place. When older folks get pulled out of their environment, they go downhill fast. Tessa jolted, blood draining from her face. Leonard sat up straight, the cold eyes of a man who'd sat on the bench for more than 30 years cutting through them. Stop, he said. Play it again from the beginning. I did. Every sentence, every laugh, every calculation echoed through the room like knives tearing through the facade they'd built. When the recording ended, a heavy silence fell. Pratt's friend, a middle-aged man with glasses who'd introduced himself as a family and marital assets attorney, spoke grimly. If this recording is authentic, there are at least 3 crimes here. Conspiracy to defraud assets, coercion of an elderly person, and attempted deprivation of property rights. Each can carry up to 10 years. It cracked the air like thunder. Tessa gasped and grabbed Brandon's hand. Say something, Brandon! But Brandon said nothing. His face flushed, his eyes blazed. I recognized it, the look of the 10-year-old who smashed a window when he didn't get a toy. He growled, You're nothing. That money is mine. It was my father's, and I'm the only son. You blew it without asking anyone. That's right, I said softly. Because he left it to me, not to someone planning to throw me out of my own home. The air thickened. Elaine looked from me to her daughter, lips trembling. Tessa, is this true? Tessa burst into tears and tried to grab her mother's hand, but Elaine pulled away. Leonard stood, his voice low and heavy as a gavel. I thought my daughter chose a decent man. Turns out she married someone willing to rob his own mother. Brandon, if I were still on the bench, you wouldn't get a chance to argue. Brandon turned on me, eyes burning. Are you doing this to humiliate me? I was only trying to help. I met his eyes, my voice even. No, Brandon, you were trying to help yourself. No one spoke. One of Pratt's friends rose first, muttering, I think dinner's over. The second followed, then Elaine, then Leonard. The door closed, and the apartment held only 3, me, Brandon, and Tessa. No laughter, no clinking dishes, only the truth sitting on the table beside a file folder and a small USB. I cleared each spilled glass of wine and each crumpled napkin and felt light. The dinner they had expected was over, but for me, the first chapter of justice had just begun. After everyone left, the apartment was so quiet I could hear the clock in the living room. Overhead lights fell across the tablecloth, highlighting stains of red wine, the traces of a dinner I would never forget. Brandon stood in the middle of the room, face flushed, fists clenched. Tessa collapsed into a chair, shoulders shaking fear or anger, I couldn't tell. I knew if I didn't end this night with a decisive move, I would never have peace. So I walked to the glass cabinet and opened the hidden compartment Naomi had helped me prepare. Inside lay a thick packet tied with a blue ribbon. I carried it to the table and set it down. There's something you don't know, I said, oddly calm. Brandon stared at the packet. What now, Mom? The deed? You want to keep performing this little show? I looked straight at him. No, Brandon. This is my new will. More specifically, an irrevocable trust. Tessa. I looked up, surprised. Irrevocable. Trust? That's right. I opened the file and showed them page by page. Naomi helped me set it up legally, notarized by a law office with 2 independent witnesses. All assets, including this condo, my savings, and remaining investments have been transferred into the trust. I can't pull them back, and no one can amend them without a court order. Brandon squinted. Then who's the beneficiary? I turned to the second page, voice steady. Not you, and not Tessa. He froze, his face twitching. Then who? The Elder Abuse Protection Fund, with Naomi and her firm as legal advisors. When I pass, Everything will be donated to help people like me who were threatened, controlled, and humiliated by their own family." Silence swallowed the room. Brandon let out a hard laugh. "You're joking. I'm your only son." I nodded gently. "You're right, but sons don't shove their mothers into cheap nursing homes or hire fake doctors to sign mental health papers to steal a home. I only—" "Enough, Brandon." I cut in, low and firm. "Gil Whitmore's son doesn't behave like that. If you had any of your father's blood, you'd be ashamed." Tessa shot to her feet. "Wait, how did you set that up? An irrevocable trust can still be voided if the grantor lacked capacity at signing." "You can't." A light laugh came from the doorway. Naomi stepped in, gray coat over her shoulders. Another case in hand. "You're right, Tessa. If Mrs. Audrey lacked capacity, this would be void. Unfortunately for you," she set a small USB on the table, "we recorded a capacity confirmation with an independent psychologist and a notary. All of it's on file." Tessa went white. Brandon swung toward Naomi, voice rough. "Who are you to butt into my family's business?" Naomi smiled, arms crossed. "I'm his mother's attorney. And I strongly advise you not to say anything else that could be used against you in the coming case." Brandon slammed his hand on the table. "You did this to destroy me? To make me a criminal?" I met his eyes, steady enough to make him step back half a pace. "No, Brandon, I'm protecting what's left of my life and your father's honor. You made yourself into a criminal." I didn't need to help. The air thickened. Brandon grabbed the documents, flipped through a few pages, then hurled them onto the table. "This isn't over." "You think a stack of papers can bury me?" I didn't react. I simply opened my phone, hit record, and said quietly, "Thank you for stating your intent. Consider this more evidence of threats and coercion." He glared at me. "You'll regret this." Naomi cut in, voice cool as ice. "If you're planning violence, remember there are lawful cameras here, and everything you say is backed up to the cloud." Tessa tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Let's go, Brandon. Don't let them. Record more." But Brandon stood rigid, lips shaking with rage. "You canceled the will, you set up a trust, you changed the locks, but you're still my mother." "You'll do what I say!" I shook my head and placed a new set of keys on the table. "No, Brandon, I changed every lock this afternoon, door fobs and the basement lock. You no longer have a spare. If you come in again without permission, that's trespassing." Tessa's voice trembled. "Aren't you afraid?" I looked at her, no anger left, just fatigue. "I am. But fear doesn't earn respect. This time I choose peace, even if it means facing my own son." Tessa looked down, as if something had finally sunk in. Brandon didn't. He snatched up the file, threw it to the floor, then stormed out. Before he left, he shouted, "This isn't over! You'll pay for this!" The door slammed like thunder on a clear day. To be honest, I still get a chill when I hear, "You'll pay for this!" But the glint of my new keys eased my heart. What about you? What struck you more, the threat or the slam of the lock? Leave a few words in the comments. I'll read and cherish every line. The apartment fell silent again. I took a deep breath to steady myself. Naomi stepped over, picked up the scattered file, and put it neatly back together. "Judge Pratt was right," she said quietly. "You need to secure every piece of evidence. He's losing control, and when people like that feel cornered, they can do anything." I nodded. "I know, but this time I'm not hiding." The door opened. Leonard Pratt and Elaine had come back. Maybe they still couldn't believe what they'd seen. Leonard moved closer, his voice warm but firm. "Mrs. Audrey, I owe you an apology for my daughter. I didn't imagine Tessa would go this far." "I don't blame you, Judge Pratt," I said softly. "When parents believe their child is good, we don't see the rest." He nodded, eyes stern. "Then listen to me. Protect your evidence, recordings, copies, cameras, all of it. Your son, I see danger in his eyes. Naomi added, I'll arrange to move everything to a secure archive and send a copy to the local police in case of any trespass. Leonard's voice roughened. If you need it, I still have friends in the system. One call. I smiled gratefully. Thank you, but I think I'll be okay. I have an attorney, evidence, and the belief that I deserve peace. Elaine laid a hand on my shoulder. Not everyone who has children gets love. But you chose, right? You chose yourself? I squeezed her hand. I don't want to beat anyone. I just want to live without bowing my head. They left. Naomi stayed to help me clean up. When it was just the two of us, she looked around, worried. This isn't over, Audrey. He won't give up easily. I let out a small, tired laugh but stood firm. I know. But at least now, all the pieces are face up. The rest? Let the law do its job. I walked Naomi to the door and locked it tight. The light reflected off the new deadbolt. Bright, cold, solid. I touched it and whispered to myself, this isn't just a lock. It's the lock on a new life. In the hall, a draft slipped under the door like a warning. Peace is only temporary. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I'd gone too far to turn back. On the other side, in the dark, I knew Brandon was planning his next move, and so was I. After that dinner, I thought things would calm down, that Brandon would need time to think, to realize he'd gone too far. I was wrong. Sometimes when someone used to controlling others loses that grip, they don't stop, they escalate. On the first day after the confrontation, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mom, just listen. I didn't mean it, I just got heated. I didn't respond. I remembered Naomi's words. Don't react, Audrey. Anything he says could be bait. An hour later, the 10th call came. 3 days, did you hear me? 72 hours. If you don't cancel that damn trust, you'll regret it. I hung up and saved the recording. And so it went. Brandon's tone swung like a pendulum all day, begging, threats, fake sympathy. I sat in the living room, hearing my own child through the speaker, not fear now, but a mix of sorrow and ice. That evening, Tessa called. Mrs. Audrey, I'm bringing a doctor to see you. Just a quick check to make sure you're stable. Her voice was so sweet, I had to stop myself from laughing. Fine, I said. Come on over. I texted Naomi immediately. Less than half an hour later, Tessa's Lexus pulled up. A man in a white coat with a badge reading Dr. Stephen Harris came with her. He shook hands with the security guard and said loudly, I'm here at the son's request to assess the patient's mental health. The guard nodded, but I was inside watching on the new camera Naomi had installed. When Tessa rang, Naomi appeared behind them with a local officer. Excuse me, Naomi said evenly. May I see your medical license? The man fumbled and produced a fake card with a crooked logo and a misspelled name. Naomi frowned. Thank you. I'll verify that. She turned to the officer. Can you check the North Carolina Medical Registry for this name? 5 minutes later, the officer said quietly, No such person. You're under arrest for impersonating a medical professional. Tessa went pale. I didn't know. Brandon must have. Naomi just smiled. You can explain that. At the station. They were escorted away. I stood in my apartment listening to the door close, feeling both bitter and relieved. The worst thing wasn't being attacked, it was watching your own family become strangers before your eyes. The next 3 days, it didn't stop. On Tuesday at midday, 2 rumpled men in suits knocked. They claimed to be from the Elder Protection Agency, speaking in thick Southern drawls. We got a report that Mrs. Audrey Whitmore is being isolated. We need a safety check. I watched on the door camera. One was smoking in the hallway. The other held a grimy notepad with misspelled headings. I pressed the intercom. Elder protection staff don't show up smoking at someone's door. One raised an eyebrow and sneered. Think you're smart, do you? Naomi was at her office, but one text from me was enough. 10 minutes later, she arrived with real police. The two were cuffed for impersonating officials. Naomi turned to me, firm. See, Audrey? When your boundaries begin to hold, bad actors will try everything to take them back. That's when we do the opposite, reinforce them. That afternoon, her tech team installed a full camera system, one in the living room, two in the hallways, a small one near the kitchen window. Everything tied into building security and Naomi's phone. You don't have to. Open the door for anyone, she said. If anything's off, I'll get the alert before you do. I nodded, feeling safer than I had in a long time. Late Thursday night, just before midnight, I'd barely turned off the lights when glass shattered in the kitchen. A sharp, icy sound split the quiet. I jolted upright, heart pounding. Cold air poured through the busted window, along with heavy footsteps. "Where are you?" Brandon's voice. I held my breath, slipped into the bedroom closet, eased the door shut, and clutched my phone. "No one saw us, right?" Tessa's shaky voice. "Shut up," Brandon snapped. "We just need those files and everything's ours." I shook not from fear, but from disbelief at how far the sun I'd raised had fallen. The motion sensor triggered the soft hallway lights part of Naomi's setup. 2 seconds later, my phone buzzed. "Intrusion detected. Stay quiet, police, en route." I heard them rummaging in the kitchen, things hitting the rand floor, then Tessa's choked whisper, "Brandon, we're wrong. Stop." He only yelled, "Shut up. It's her fault. If not for that damn trust, we wouldn't have to do this." Blue lights flickered outside. Sirens sliced the night. "Police! Drop everything!" I cracked the closet door and caught a glimpse of Brandon turning, face ashen. For an instant, our eyes met the same eyes that once begged me for bedtime stories, now wild with panic and hate. Then the shout, "On the ground!" Heavy footsteps, the cold, final click of handcuffs. Tessa cried. Brandon was silent. Naomi rushed in, draped a coat over my shoulders, and pulled me from the closet. "It's over, Audrey." They were caught in the act, breaking and entering, vandalism, harassment, threats. I sat on the couch, hands shaking, breath ragged. Naomi held up her phone and replayed the footage. Brandon smashing the window, stepping inside, Tessa behind him, hands trembling, their voices crystal clear. "I'll file everything. The cameras and audio are enough to get a permanent restraining order," she said. I nodded, tears slipping down, uncertain if from fear or release. Outside, officers took statements. Blue and red lights spilled across the broken glass, scattering like memories weaving old and new. I stood and looked around the wrecked kitchen, the shards glittering in the glow. And in that mess, I realized I was still here, still fully entitled to stand in my own home. For the first time in months, I felt a nameless kind of strength, the kind you only find when you dare to set a final boundary. The next morning, after the police left, I called a repairman to replace the glass and change every lock yet again. Naomi sat with me in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, her voice calm but firm. "We'll file everything with the court this week. Brandon will face the consequences. And this time, the law will speak for you." I nodded softly. Outside the window, the first light of dawn spilled through the new pane, clear, bright, dustless. I touched the glass, felt the cold on my fingertips, and smiled. "Do you see this, Gil?" I whispered. "Our home is finally safe." On the morning of the hearing, Charlotte lay under a thin veil of mist, as if the city were holding its breath. I stepped out of Naomi's car, leather gloves warming hands that still trembled a little. A few reporters lingered by the oak doors, cameras lifted. Naomi murmured, "Don't worry, they don't know your face. We asked the court to protect your identity." I nodded. I've stood in plenty of dry offices and signed hundreds of accounting forms in my life, but I had never entered a courtroom as both a victim and the person standing up for herself. The courtroom was small, just 12 gallery seats. Brandon sat across the aisle in a black suit, head slightly bowed, face gaunt but eyes still flashing defiance. Tessa sat a few rows away, avoiding his gaze. The judge read out the charges, clear and steady. Defendant Brandon Pierce is charged with breaking and entering, property damage, harassment, and threats against an elderly person. Today's hearing is to review evidence and decide on a restraining order. Brandon's attorney, a gray-haired man with a confident stance, stood first. Your Honor, this entire situation stems from Mrs. Audrey Whitmore's agitation and emotional instability. My client only came to talk, but given her history of stress after her husband's death, she overreacted. The matter has been exaggerated. I clenched my hands, but Naomi rested hers lightly on mine, a quiet signal to breathe. Our turn, she said, then rose, her calm voice cutting like a cold blade. Your Honor, we have authenticated evidence proving Mrs. Audrey is fully competent, stable, and the one who was attacked, not the other way around. She presented a sealed packet, independent appraisal of the condo, $400,000, signed by Hamilton and Lee Real Estate. A capacity confirmation video recorded by Dr. Daughter. Evan Carter, a licensed psychologist in North Carolina, affirming I was fully lucid and understood all legal decisions at the time I signed the trust. Transparent financial statements provided by independent accountant Mia Delgado, showing no outside influence over my income or spending. Naomi faced the bench, voice slow and precise. Your Honor, no one is controlling Mrs. Audrey. She is exercising a basic right every citizen has to protect her property and her dignity. The defense objected. The judge motioned them quiet. Naomi signaled, and a precinct officer brought in a sealed USB. This is the break-in footage from the night of June 23rd, she said. The court monitor lit up, Brandon in frame, hard object in hand, smashing the kitchen window and climbing in. Tessa behind him, voice shaking. Brandon, we're wrong. The audio was crisp. There was no room to deny it. When the clip ended, the room fell silent. I could hear the clock on the wall. The defense cleared his throat, reaching, Your Honor, this was a momentary emotional lapse, not an intent to harm. Enough, the judge cut in. The evidence is more than clear. Naomi stood. We request a restraining order within a radius of 300 meters and temporary probation. The judge nodded and made notes. Brandon lifted his head, face drained. He wanted to speak, but when his eyes met mine, his lips only quivered, no words came out. During the short recess, I sat in a side room and took a long breath. Tessa suddenly stepped in, dark circles under her eyes, voice rough. Mrs. Audrey, I want to cooperate. I know I was wrong. Naomi stiffened, but I signaled her to let me listen. Tessa stared at the table. Brandon said, if you kept resisting, he would slip a sleeping pill into your evening tea. I thought he was bluffing, but... She went quiet, tears slid down. I didn't think he'd actually do it. Naomi nodded. Are you willing to sign a statement? Tessa whispered. Yes. I just want this to end. Back in the courtroom, Tessa took the stand. The judge asked, Do you swear to tell the truth? Yes, Your Honor. She recounted everything. Brandon's repeated plans to make me seem unstable, the search for a fake doctor, even talk of light dosing to make her confused. I closed my eyes and let each word land like a stone. It hurt, but strangely, it didn't wound the way it once did. It felt like a long chapter closing. The judge ruled, Defendant Brandon Pierce is placed on 18 months probation and is barred from approaching the plaintiff within a radius of 300 meters, including by phone or electronic means. Any violation will be converted to jail time immediately. The prosecutor added, separate investigations are underway regarding medical impersonation and impersonating public officials. Tessa bowed her head, murmured, I'm sorry. I met her eyes. I know. But the apology isn't for me, it's for yourself. As people filed out, a familiar, solemn voice came from behind. "Mrs. Audrey." I turned. Judge Leonard Pratt approached, face sorrowful but sincere. I want to apologize as a father. We didn't raise our child for this." I looked at him and offered a small smile. "Every family has its own lesson to learn, Judge Pratt. What matters is who's willing to learn it." He nodded and squeezed my hand. "If you need anything, I'll help." "I just need peace," I said. "And justice like today." When I stepped outside, sunlight flooded the street. Charlotte seemed to glow after so many days of rain. Naomi walked beside me, a gentle smile on her face. "You did it, Audrey! You didn't just win a case, you won against your past." I looked up into the clear blue. "No one won here, Naomi. Someone simply learned to stand." A reporter came closer, cautious. "Ma'am, we've heard you're a victim in a recent elder abuse case. Would you like to share anything?" I hesitated, then said, "I don't want to talk about myself. I want people to remember that elder abuse isn't only physical. It starts with words, with taking, with contempt. If you stay silent too long, they start to believe you don't have a voice." I paused, looking into the lens. "At some point, you have to speak not for revenge, but to live." She thanked me. I stepped down the stairs. The air carried sun-warmed lavender from the nearby park. I breathed deeply, my lungs opening as if for the first real breath in ages. A group of students laughed in the distance. A woman walked her dog. Church bells drifted on the breeze, simple, peaceful, and to me, light after the storm. I turned to Naomi. "You know, maybe Gil is looking down." Smiling, she nodded. "And I'm sure he's proud." I smiled, and as if closing my own journey out loud, said, "In the end, no one can take my life from me when I'm the one willing to protect it." Charlotte shone that day. And for me, it was the first morning of a new beginning. One morning in mid-August, with soft sun and a hint of lavender blowing in from the balcony, Naomi brought someone new. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, "this is Linda Park, Director of Safe Steps for Seniors, which supports older adults facing abuse or financial exploitation. I think you two will have a lot to talk about." Linda, a Korean-American woman around 60, was small-framed with bright eyes and a warm smile. Her handshake was cool and steady. "I read about your case," she said gently but decisively. "Thank you for speaking up. Few people have the courage to do that, especially with family." I smiled and invited her in. We sat at the dining table that had once been a battlefield where every lie was stripped away. Today, it felt quiet and safe. Coffee in the air, distant traffic humming. After a few minutes, Linda set down her cup and looked around. "Mrs. Audrey, I have a bold idea, and I'll regret not saying it if I keep quiet." "Please," I said. "This place warm, quiet, safe, could it become a temporary refuge for a few older women? Just for a few days when they've just left dangerous situations until they're moved to stable housing." I went still. I could see myself from months ago shaking, seeking a door away from threatening voices. "You mean, let them stay here?" "Not exactly." Linda smiled. "We don't want to intrude on your privacy. Maybe the adjacent service wing, in the same building, short-term units, or even just a community room, a place to breathe, eat a hot meal, and remember they're not alone." I fell quiet. Sunlight flashed on the pane I'd just replaced, clean and clear like another new start. "Let me think," I said, and, honestly, my heart began to stir with something not called fear, but purpose. That evening, I reread the building policies. The complex had a serviced wing short-term apartments rented for a few weeks. I remembered a clause. Residents could lease one long-term for personal or non-profit use, pending approval. The next morning, Naomi and I met with the building manager. I'd like to secure a unit in the service block, I said. Not for commercial rental as a temporary refuge for older women in crisis. He looked surprised. But when Naomi produced the trust paperwork and our partnership plan with Safe Steps for seniors, the tone shifted. That's a wonderful idea, he said. We'll need an internal review, but I doubt there'll be objections. Naomi smiled at me. And for taxes, don't worry. I'll structure a compliant nonprofit framework. Your trust can allocate operating funds without violating any terms. 3 weeks later, I held the keys to a new unit, third floor, west-facing, with a small balcony over the park. I stood in the empty room and drew a deep breath. Fresh paint, clean wood, and something pure, the scent of freedom. Linda's team came to help set up. Nothing fancy, she said. Just safety. We placed 3 low wooden beds, a small dining table, a bookshelf, a lounge chair, and a board with simple affirmations. You still matter. You still belong. I enrolled in an online psychological first aid and elder safety course offered by Duke. Short sessions, but they helped me understand trauma and isolation, the kind I and so many others had borne. Naomi handled the paperwork, and Linda introduced me to Patricia Hale, a social worker who'd spent years in domestic violence shelters. Patricia's voice was soft as cotton. When she entered a room, the air seemed to settle. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, "I feel lucky to start this with you." The first women arrived in early fall. Beatrice, 70, kicked out by her son after she refused to sell her co-op to invest. Joan, 73, saddled with debt after a grandson borrowed her name for credit cards. Lila, 61, fresh from a marriage where her medication had been controlled for 7 years. They came looking different, one with a torn suitcase, one with a plastic bag of clothes, but their eyes held the same dullness of lost trust. I saw myself in them, anxious, doubtful, unsure the world could be kind again. On the first night, we ate together. Simple food, chicken soup, toast, apple salad. No one said much until I lifted my water glass and said, "We're not victims, we're on our way back to ourselves." The room went quiet, then Beatrice began to cry. Joan laid a hand on her shoulder. Lila managed a small smile. We built a small routine. Morning light exercise on the balcony. Afternoon basic banking skills, reading statements, protecting accounts. Evening group counseling with Patricia Spacebat to tell our stories. On weekends, I ran a tech basics session, how to use a phone, video call, create strong passwords. Something gentle and surprising happened within weeks. Beatrice started to laugh again. Joan wrote a letter thanking her bank for helping resolve fraudulent debt. Lila asked to learn more computer skills to find remote work. One winter evening, I watched them around the table under a warm lamp, laughter mingling with the faint clink of cutlery, and thought, I didn't just survive. I am living again and helping others do the same. One afternoon, Linda brought a small carved wooden sign. "You should name this place," she said. "A name?" I smiled. "I haven't thought of one." Naomi pointed to the carving. "The W room, where we return to ourselves." I read it slowly, each word touching a tender place. The W room, where we return to ourselves. Linda smiled. W for Whitmore, or for women, or for we. Who knows? Maybe for will to live, I said, eyes stinging a little. That night, I sat by the window, light stretching like golden threads across the park. In the unit next door, 3 women cooked dinner once broken, now piecing life back together. I opened Gil's old notebook and wrote one last line. "If you're still here with me, you can see it." I did what we both believed in, turned pain into a shelter for others. I closed the book and smiled. The door to the W room swung open. Patricia stepped in with a small bouquet. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, "they want to thank you for dinner and for this place." "No need," I answered. I'm giving them what I once wished for, a door that opens. In the hall, a breeze rattled the new wooden sign. Under the light, the carving stood out. The W room, where we return to ourselves. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a deep, quiet peace. I didn't just survive. I came back, and with me, other two. Women into a new chapter where care outgrows fear, and a grandmother once sent to the basement now opens the door for light to come in. That night, Beatrice had a panic attack. She woke gasping, hands shaking, eyes wild as if the room had turned back into the house where her son barked at her every morning. I rushed in and held her hand. "You're safe, Beatrice. You're in the W room. No one can touch you here." She nodded, but tears kept coming, her body curled tight. I stayed until her breathing slowed. Near 3 a.m., Beatrice finally slept. As I rose to leave, moonlight fell on a framed photo of the three of us at the W room's opening. I looked at it, warm and heavy all at once. Recovery, I realized, is never a straight line. The next morning, Joan sat before a new stack of bank papers, face pale. "I can't read any of this," she whispered. "I'm scared, Audrey. Every time I see numbers on a page, I hear my grandson's voice. Sign it, Grandma. It's just a form." I knew that fear not of words or numbers, but of memories of being tricked. That afternoon, I called accountant Mia Delgado, who had helped me prepare for court. "Mia, can you teach a read, understand, sign class for my group? We need someone to decode this world of paperwork." Mia laughed on the phone. "A finance class for grandmas? I love it. I'll be there tomorrow." The session was special. Mia brought a whiteboard and wrote simple truths. Sign equals agree. Read equals protect yourself. She flagged common scams and showed how to call bank hotlines and underscored no one is too old to understand, only taught to be afraid. Joan listened closely, and for the first time in years, she signed the confirmation for her own new account, hands still trembling, smile bright. Lila, the youngest, still wasn't sleeping. She often jolted awake at 2 or 3 a.m., staring into the dark. One evening, Patricia arrived with a deck of therapy cards. "Story, cards," she said. "Each one is a feeling. Pick the one that's you." Lila chose a card of a woman at a door, key in hand. I don't know whether to open or close it," she whispered. "That's okay," Patricia said. "What matters is that you're holding the key, not anyone else." Listening outside, I felt my chest ease. They were reclaiming control, the thing I once thought I'd lost forever. One sunny afternoon, I rehung Gil's photo where the morning light lands. Quietly, as if he were in the room, I said, "We're using the remaining $200,000 just as you wanted, not to run, but to build a place where someone can stand again when they thought they'd fallen." His gentle smile seemed to agree. I touched the glass and felt an unfamiliar peace. A week later, the local precinct called. "Mrs. Whitmore, quick update. Brandon Pierce made a minor violation of the order. He parked near the building for a few minutes, then left. We issued a warning and added electronic monitoring. I was silent for a moment. News like that used to rattle me. This time it felt like a small wave that touched shore and faded. "I understand," I said. "Thank you for letting me know." I hung up and looked out at the afternoon sun on the street. I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't living in fear. I was living in clarity. More and more, the complex embraced the W room. First, a few curious neighbors stopped by. Then they brought baked goods, hot soup, even signed up to teach yoga and read aloud in the evenings. An older gentleman upstairs gave us a rose bush. "To make the room prettier," he said, "so anyone who comes in can see hope." Warmth bloomed in my chest. When you dare to open a door, the light doesn't just come in, it invites kindness with it. 3 months in, the media noticed. A woman reporter called, "Mrs. Audrey, we'd like to do a feature on this community program. Your story could inspire many. I thought a long time, then said, okay, on one condition. Don't name my son. Let the story be about what we're building, not what we lost. She was quiet, then said, I understand. We'll honor that. The piece ran the next week with a plain headline, From Hurt to Hope, a small corner in Charlotte for mothers once forgotten. It drew thousands of shares, but not only praise. Amid warm comments were cutting lines, she must not be so innocent. If her son hates her, there's a reason. Old and trying to play hero. The first time I read them, I winced. Then I remembered Naomi. The internet doesn't know the truth, only you do. I learned to mute, not engage, and never let strangers decide my worth. One quiet evening while I sorted files, my phone buzzed. A text from Lila, thank you for giving us a name, not just victim. I read that line over and over, tears falling while my lips still held a smile. Outside, a breeze slipped through the hallway, making the wooden sign, the W room where we return to ourselves, gently rattle. I looked around the apartment. Beatrice was brewing tea. Joan was straightening the curtains. Patricia was jotting notes for tomorrow's group session. None of us is perfect. None of us has never broken. But each one is learning how to piece herself back together with patience, with trust, and with a quiet kind of strength only those who have fallen truly understand. I suddenly remembered Gil's words, you're stronger than you think. Now I understand that sentence fully. Strength isn't never falling, it's standing up, brushing off the dust, and moving forward without retreat. I lit a small candle. The warm light reflected on his picture frame. Gil, I whispered. We took a long way around to get back to where we were meant to stand among people who know how to love and be loved. Outside, Charlotte sparkled at night. A new chapter was opening, not loud, not dazzling, but bright enough to light the way for those still finding their way back to themselves. One early winter morning, when mist still blurred the lake, Naomi stepped into the W room with a thick envelope. Mail for you, Audrey, she said, setting it on the table. From Brandon's attorney. I looked at the beige envelope, the neat italic type, and felt my chest tighten. It had been almost 8 months since the hearing ended. I thought the waters had finally calmed. Naomi sat across from me, cautious. I read it. Nothing legal, just Brandon asking to meet. Says he wants to apologize and end things peacefully. I was quiet. Old memories surged. My son's voice that night. You'll pay for this. The shatter of glass, the eyes full of hatred. And yet, in the middle of those dark flashes, a small beam of light, an 8-year-old boy running around the house, shouting, Mom, I fixed the lamp. The mother's heart in me flickered for a moment, but reason pulled me back. I knew that loop, the cycle of renewed harm, remorse, pleading, then the hurting again. More than a few women in the W room had said the same line. He said sorry, and I believed him, until it happened again. I looked at Naomi. If I refuse, is that cruel? She shook her head. Forgiveness is a right, but reconnection isn't required. You can forgive and still keep distance. Sometimes the greatest kindness is knowing when to close the door. I sat a long time with the unopened letter. Finally, I picked up a pen and wrote a brief reply. Brandon, I received your message. I wish you peace and hope you find the help you need to understand and heal yourself. But I will not meet. That conversation would only take us both back to the old place. I encourage you to try therapy. And please, do not contact me again. I am not angry. I'm simply choosing to live in peace. Audrey. I signed, folded it, and handed it to Naomi. She read it and nodded. Perfect. Calm, clear, without resentment. I'll send it to his attorney. After Naomi left, I looked at Gil's photo hanging in the sunny corner. Morning light fell across that gentle smile. I said quietly. Do you see, Gil? I learned how to close a door without locking my heart. A few days later, my inbox pinged. Sender, Tessa Rowan Pierce. The subject line said only, I owe you something. I read in silence. Mrs. Audrey, I'm not trying to justify anything. I let fear and greed drive me. Brandon is no longer the person I loved. I'm in a recovery program and want to do what's right. I accept my share of responsibility and would like to make a symbolic repayment, a gift in Mr. Gil's name, whom I insulted indirectly through my actions. I understand if you won't accept it, but I want to send it to close a chapter. I forwarded it to Naomi. She read and said, if you want, I'll handle it properly. We can route it directly to the W Room's support fund in Mr. Gill's name. I think he'd like that. I smiled. Do it. Let that intention become something good. A week later, I received a handwritten card from Judge Leonard Pratt. Inside were a few uneven lines. Wishing you health and peace. May all good things come to the W Room and the women there. Leonard and Elaine. I finished reading and smiled softly. No bitterness, no aftertaste. I filed the card in the small drawer labeled, Done. Life went on for us, simple and full of life. Beatrice grew an herb garden on the balcony. Mint, rosemary, lavender. Every morning she watered and said, each little leaf is a thank you for being alive. Joan became the W Room's treasurer. Her ledger was so tidy that Mia had to say, when I retire, you can take my chair. Lila was confident enough to volunteer at the library, teaching reading to older women. On her first day, she sent me a photo. 3 women around a table, grinning over open books. I looked at those images and felt like I was watching souls bloom after a long winter. One afternoon, I stood on the balcony and looked out. Charlotte was easing into the holidays, lights strung across buildings, their glow spilling onto the streets like a river of stars. I breathed in. The wind carried the smell of waffle cookies from the cafe nearby. In that moment, I understood more deeply than ever. I had come back to life, not because someone allowed it, but because I allowed myself to live not with the past, but with the present. I looked around the apartment that used to be a battlefield and was now a shared home. Laughter from the living room, the smell of hot soup, the evening news on TV. Peace, earned peace, not something handed to me. I realized I hadn't heard the old doorbell in a long time, that urgent alarm of a sound. That afternoon, I called a technician to change it. What kind do you want? He asked. I want a sound that doesn't startle me. When someone comes, I said. Just a light wind. When he tested it, the tone rang ting, ting, like wind moving through Beatrice's herb garden. I smiled. Perfect. That night I sat by the window finishing notes for the W Room's monthly report. Outside, light rain tapped the clean pane. I closed my notebook, about to switch off the lamp when my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then picked up. Excuse me, is this the place for older women who've been abused? The voice was hoarse, tight, tired, the sound of someone who had cried too long. I glanced at the wooden sign on the wall, the W Room, where we returned to ourselves. I took a breath and spoke softly, like a lullaby. Yes, it is. Take a breath. Come to us. It's safe here, you're not alone. Silence on the line, then a sigh, weak but full of hope. Thank you. I'll come. I set the phone down and looked around the room where every crack had been mended with trust. Outside, the wind chime sounded softly, like the past greeting the present. I whispered to myself, letting my voice blend into that sound. This door stays open, but only for those trying to return to themselves. Then I turned off the lamp and let the hall light spill through the crack. Soft as a ribbon. The W Room was ready to welcome someone new, and another life was about to begin again, the way mine once did. That morning, Winter wind moved through the corridor, carrying damp cold and the smell of toast from downstairs. I was making tea when Linda came in, her face tense. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, closing the door gently. "We have a new case. A 76-year-old named Nora Alvarado, immigrant from Guatemala. Her grandson is holding all her papers, her green card, and her savings. She's been sleeping at a nearby church, but the priest says she's afraid to go back." I set the cup down, my heart tightening. "Does she have anywhere else to go?" "No," Linda said, and last night it dropped close to below freezing. "I think the W room is the only warm place right now." 15 minutes later, the door opened. Patricia guided in, a tiny woman, loose white hair, rubber sandals worn down to shapeless. The coat on her shoulders was borrowed, buttons missing, hem torn. "Mrs. Nora," I said, stepping forward, "please sit. No one here asks about your past. We just need to know that right now you're safe." She looked up, eyes exhausted but deep. "Gracias, señora," she whispered, taking my hand dry, trembling like a leaf. That afternoon, Linda and Patricia huddled at the dining table. "The problem is documents," Linda said, opening her laptop. "If her grandson has the green card and social security number, Nora can't get any assistance." Patricia nodded. "I'll contact the city's humanitarian office. They have an emergency path for elder financial abuse. We need lawful temporary status to open a case." Added, "For food and medical care, I'll draw from the trust for the first month. Gil would definitely agree." Linda smiled, hands pausing in midair. "Mr. Gill is your husband, right?" I nodded toward the photo in the corner. "He left insurance and wished I'd use it where it belongs. I think now I know where belongs is." Patricia glanced at me, then at Nora asleep on the sofa, mouth moving lightly, as if dreaming. "Mrs. Audrey," she said softly, "he must be proud." 3 days later, Nora's temporary status was approved. Patricia shared the news over dinner. "You'll get immigration support and emergency aid. They're also letting us open a dedicated account so Nora can receive assistance directly." Nora squeezed my hand, eyes wet. "Your Mr. Gill is still here in every good decision you make." I smiled, my nose stinging. "Maybe so. I don't see him in dreams anymore, but I see him in everyone who walks through this door." By month's end, the building hosted its first community dinner. A resident initiative after seeing the W room's ripple of good. People brought home-cooked dishes, soup, cakes, salads, hot cider. No stage, just a few long tables with checkered cloths. The building manager asked me to say a few words. I stood, mic shaking a little, and looked at the kind faces, the neighbor who helped mount cameras, the widow from 6 floors up who brings cakes, the young guard who always lifts boxes. I spoke slowly. "Thank you for turning this place into a real community. We can't fix the years already gone, but we still have time to be kind. And I believe that's enough to change someone's world." Applause rose. Nora stood and hugged me from behind. A hint of mint in her hair drifted past, gentle as a thank you that didn't need words. 2 days later, Naomi brought me a digital envelope. "Email from Brandon," she said. More than 10 pages. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking on. Unread. My heart dipped. "Did you read it?" "I did," Naomi said. "Same themes: remorse, promises to change, says he's leaving Charlotte. But Audrey, I don't think you need to read it. You've closed that chapter." I nodded, smiling slightly. "You know what I'm going to do." Naomi smiled back and clicked archive. That door closed again quietly, without sound, without resentment. That evening, Beatrice and I replaced the hallway bulbs. "Warm light makes people feel safer," I said. Beatrice nodded, smiling. "Also makes the skin look better." I laughed. When we finished, I hung a small wooden sign near the entrance, the letters cleanly carved. "If you need safety, knock 3 times. Nuban Kun and Tuan, Haigobalan. I stepped back to admire it. Just a few words, but they might be a lifeline for someone in the middle of despair. That night, wind hit the windows hard, branches tapped the glass. I was reviewing our operations. Log when I heard 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not the bell, not the wind. 3 clear, hesitant beats. I opened the door. A woman stood there in a raincoat, hair tangled, clutching a plastic bag with both hands. Her eyes were swollen red, her voice shook. I heard that if you need a place, you can come here. Is this the W room? I looked at her and recognized in those eyes the image of everyone who had stepped through our door lost, afraid, but still holding a shred of belief that the world could be better. I smiled and opened wide. Yes, it is. Please come in. Here, we start again with a name and a hello. She hesitated, then said softly, My name is Evelyn. I'm Audrey, I said, pouring tea. Sit down, Evelyn. We start with a cup of tea. Everything gets better from there. As she sat, Beatrice brought a towel. Lila grabbed a blanket. Joan made more tea. No one needed to ask about the past, we simply cared, as if we'd been doing it forever. Outside, the hallway light cast a warm glow on the knock 3 times sign, making it shine in the rainy night. I stood and took in the scene, my heart swelling. The W room is no longer just an apartment, it's a chosen family, not bound by blood, but by a shared belief that there's still a place to return to, whether you arrive in rain or in fear. I looked up at the city of Charlotte resting under the night, quiet, with streetlights reflected on the water. I murmured to myself, this story doesn't end. It simply transforms. And it was true when Evelyn lifted her head. A small light flickered in her eyes, the same light I once found in myself. I set down my cup and sat with them at the table. We didn't need many words. We just had to be there, present, quiet, full of meaning. Outside, the city went to sleep. And the W room, where the once abandoned are finding themselves again, stayed lit, small and steady, like a night watch flame guiding lost souls. Home. Morning in Charlotte was still. I sat by the window, dew on the frame, the sun just peeking over distant buildings. On the table, a brown leather notebook lay open, and with a slow hand, I wrote 3 words. I am still here. Not as a declaration, but as a reminder. After all the storms and the pushes to the bottom, I was still here in the same apartment that had been a battleground and was now a place of healing. I no longer needed anyone to prove I was a good mother or a faithful wife. I just needed to know I was someone who lived by her boundaries. Gil once dreamed of a quiet home where he and I would grow flowers, listen to jazz, and watch the sun set over a garden. He left before that dream took shape. But in another way, I think I made it real for him. I didn't grow flowers, I built a home for women whose voices had been taken. We don't just share space, we share strength. Voices that once shook now ring out in bright rooms. Brandon once tried to take everything: money, the condo, my dignity. But in the end, I was the one who reclaimed it all, not possessions, but my selfhood and the freedom to redefine myself. I've learned that forgiveness isn't opening the old door to someone who hurt you. Forgiveness is changing the lock. It's letting others go and keeping the peace for yourself. That morning, while everyone in the W room still slept, I opened my laptop and created a new file. Title: Anti-Elder Abuse Toolkit for Families, the W Manual. I wrote the simplest guidance: how to recognize manipulation, how to preserve evidence legally, a list of hotlines and protective laws, and finally, one closing line: you have the right to be safe, respected, and heard at any age. I plan to release it free on our community page. Naomi promised to help edit and register it. This will help more people than you think, she said. I smiled. I'm not trying to save anyone. I just want them to know. They're not alone. At noon, Beatrice called me to the balcony. Look, she pointed at the herb box. The basil bloomed. I thought it wouldn't make it through winter. I laughed. Just like us. We thought we were done, but give us a little warmth, and we bud again. Beatrice nodded, a new light in her eyes. In the living room, Joan was keeping the books, glasses sliding down her nose. Lila showed Nora how to use a smartphone. They giggled like two girls in a computer class. Looking at them, I saw a complete picture. Every wrinkle, every silver hair, every smile, each one a small victory for people who once thought they had nothing left. I set the camera on the tripod and clicked. The first group photo of the W room. Me, Beatrice, Joan, Lila, and Nora. 5 women, 5 stories, 5 different gazes, sharing one truth: we are still here. I closed my journal and wrote the final line. As long as there are 3 knocks, the W room will stay open. I set down the pretentious pen and leaned back. Outside, the curtains stirred. Mint and coffee mingled in the air. The city of Charlotte was waking. I knew there were doors still shut somewhere, women sitting silent, waiting for someone to knock. And I prayed they would hear our voices, the ones who dared to say no. I looked out at the balcony. Morning sun laid gold across the wooden floor. A soft breeze made the wooden sign, the W room, where we return to ourselves, tremble lightly. The faint chime blended with my heartbeat, steady, peaceful, free. I smiled. Life may have taken a lot, a husband, a son, trust, but it cannot take the will to live true to myself. I understand now freedom isn't going far away. Freedom is staying without fear. I closed the journal and looked at the group photo on the wall. Beatrice tending plants, Joan beaming, Lila flashing a victory sign, Nora with hands folded in prayer. And me sitting among them, silver hair bright in the sun, mouth curved in a smile, not for anyone else, but because I am truly living. Quietly I said, Gil, you taught me to love, but you didn't teach me how to love myself. Now I know. Light slipped through the window, falling across his frame, an answer without words. On a morning like any other, I sat to write, poured tea, and listened to footsteps in the hall. I once believed that when my own story ended, everything would stay calm forever. It didn't. Life has no period, only a change in key, like a song moving into its chorus. And I know the W room will go on with new people, new stories, and new knocks. 3 knocks, small but enough to brighten a long night. Thank you for staying with me until now. If you're still listening, maybe your heart has a wound too small, but enough to keep you quiet for a long time. I hope this story reminds you, you're not weak because you once trusted. You're strong because you chose to stand up. I truly want to know, what city are you listening from? And if there was a moment that made your throat tighten, write me a line. Not to lament, but so we know that at any age, we can still find one another through kindness. If this story helped you believe a little more in the strength of older people, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your note. Every comment you write can be a small light in the night, guiding someone who's lost, like those who once knocked 3 times at the door of the W room. Just as I raised my glass to make a toast at my son's wedding, his father-in-law, Harold Hart, pointed straight at me in front of 200 guests and said loudly, "You are not worthy of being part of my family. Your son is nothing but a parasite." The ballroom fell silent, followed by a few awkward, uncomfortable laughs. I froze where I stood, my hand shaking so much that wine spilled down my dress. But while Harold thought I was weak, he had no idea I was holding something that could destroy his entire life. Something I had kept in my purse for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And tonight was that moment. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. I, Marjorie Lane, 67 years old, believed I had lived long enough not to tremble at anyone's cruelty anymore. But when Harold Hart said those words, under the bright gold lights of the Hilton Hotel ballroom and with 200 eyes fixed on me, my heart tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. My whole life I tried to raise Nathan to be a decent man, respectful, hard-working, building himself from nothing. We were not wealthy, but we were honest. And Harold, with his expensive tuxedo, smug smile, and eyes full of contempt, crushed all of that with a single sentence. I heard silverware stop clinking. A few guests forced awkward smiles to cover their embarrassment. An older woman at the table near mine let out a long sigh, as if witnessing something that should never happen at such a sacred ceremony. But I stayed frozen, feeling only the cold wine seeping into the navy satin dress I was wearing. At that moment, what hurt the most wasn't Harold's words. It was my son's eyes. Nathan stood a few tables away, his face pale, his lips barely moving. Mom. But before he could come to me, Alyssa, my future daughter-in-law, gripped his hand tightly and shook her head, signaling him to stay silent. His eyes held no anger toward me, only despair. Despair because he was trapped between the two people he loved most and couldn't protect either of us. I looked at Alyssa. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with fear. Clearly, she hadn't expected her father to behave like that, but her fear wasn't strong enough for her to stand up against him. And Nathan, I knew he would stay silent because he didn't want to add fuel to the fire. Harold kept talking, his voice steady and sharp like a formal accusation. The Hart family has always been made of accomplished, educated people with solid backgrounds, and I want to say this in front of everyone. I hope my daughter is strong enough to lead a man who is still struggling to find his place in society. Find his place in society, he emphasized each word as if hammering it into my son's dignity. I heard a few small laughs, the nasty approval of people who judge worth by money and reputation. I brushed the wine off my dress and lifted my head to look Harold straight in the eye. I smiled, just a small smile, but enough to make him pause for half a second. Just a flicker, but I caught the discomfort in his eyes. Perhaps he thought I would run off, cry, or ruin the wedding, but I didn't. I just stood there smiling as if I were waiting for him to finish, because I truly was waiting for him to step right into the trap I had laid, not with lies, but with the truth, a truth sharp enough to slice through the armor of reputation he'd worn for years. I tightened my grip on my purse. Inside were envelopes filled with documents, photos, statements, evidence I never wanted to possess, yet had no choice but to keep. Evidence I discovered months ago, starting with a small coincidence that, looking back, I now believe was destiny. Everything began on an April afternoon when I visited Harold and Sharon's home to discuss wedding plans. I arrived earlier than expected, and while I was still near the entrance, I heard Harold's voice coming from his office. His tone was loud, tense, stripped of his usual polished manners. "You need to hide that money. I won't let anyone on the board find out about this. You understand?" I froze, my hand resting lightly on the wooden door frame. I thought I misheard, but then Harold continued, his voice lower but threatening. "And let me be clear. If this gets out, not only will I fall, the entire company will collapse." I stepped back, my heartbeat suddenly fast and uneven. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I knew it wasn't something innocent, and it definitely wasn't something a respectable man like Harold wanted anyone to overhear. When he walked out, I was already in the living room pretending to admire a painting. Harold's face shifted instantly when he saw me. Then he gave me a smile, the same one I'd seen 100 times, overly confident and perfect to the point of being fake. "Oh, Marjorie, you're early," I replied casually, but inside I knew something was wrong. After that day, the uneasy feeling followed me like a shadow. I paid more attention, I observed more closely, and the more I looked, the more the scattered pieces began to fit into something very dangerous. Sharon always dodged questions about her husband's work. Alyssa avoided talking about their family finances, and Harold constantly bragged about Hart and Sons as if it were an impenetrable fortress. But every fortress has cracks. And I, an old mother with nothing but persistence, decided to find them. I went to see Caleb Morton, a private investigator and former cop in Scottsdale. I had hired him 10 years ago for a family matter, and I knew he never did sloppy work. I still remember the look he gave me when I explained the situation. "You want to investigate your future daughter-in-law's father? I want the truth," I said. "That's all I want." Caleb sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's begin." I never expected that, just a few weeks. Later, Caleb would return with information that kept me awake for many nights. Nights when I lay in my small home, staring at the ceiling like I was staring into a bottomless void. A void where Harold Hart's reputation, wealth, and entire glittering life were collapsing. And I knew. I would have to unveil that truth at the right moment. Not to get revenge, but to save my son from a life of humiliation. The same humiliation I had just endured under the ballroom lights of his own wedding. Today, tonight, this moment was where it all began. I always thought of myself as easygoing, not picky, with my son's relationships. Nathan was grown, had a stable job, and could choose for himself. But from the moment he brought Alyssa home for dinner, something inside me shifted. Not because I disliked her. Alyssa was beautiful, soft-spoken, and polite, but because her presence changed the air in my home. Something was too perfect, too shiny, too calculated. That evening, Nathan brought Alyssa over. I made pot roast and toasted bread, his childhood favorites. When I opened the door, Alyssa stood there with a bright smile, holding a bouquet of pale pink tulips, wearing a stylish dress and just enough jewelry to draw attention without overdoing it. "Nathan said you love flowers," she said as she handed me the tulips. I accepted them with thanks, but my eyes quickly dropped to her shoes. Expensive designer heels. There's nothing wrong with dressing well. But with Alyssa, everything felt intentional, crafted. Nathan didn't notice at all. He looked at her with bright, excited eyes. The eyes of a man tasting happiness for the first time. I understood. I had once seen that same look in his father, but I also knew that same glow can blind someone to danger. During dinner, Alyssa was sweet, asking about my hobbies, complimenting my kitchen, praising the house decor. But several times when I spoke, she smiled, a polite smile. Yet I had the sense she wasn't really listening. Or maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was too protective of my son. But the feeling grew stronger the night Nathan invited me to dinner at Alyssa's parents' home. The Hart mansion was so large that I felt lost the moment we stepped inside. The front door stood nearly 10 feet tall, the yard perfectly manicured, the floor marble cold beneath my feet. The entryway alone looked like a museum lobby. Harold and Sharon waited at the top of the staircase. Harold in an immaculate suit, grinning wide enough to show every tooth. Sharon in a soft blue dress, smiled gently but avoided my eyes.
"Welcome to our home," Harold said, spreading his arms like an MC on stage. Nathan was impressed. Alyssa wrapped her arm around his and smiled, a smile that tightened something in my chest. Dinner was filled with Harold's subtle bragging. He spoke about buying half the mansion in cash, expanding Hart & Sons, his investment portfolio, tax strategies. As if Nathan were sitting through a corporate seminar. Sharon quietly nodded. I listened, silent. At one point, Harold leaned toward me and said, "You know, my family has always protected its reputation. We cannot afford any cracks." He emphasized, "Absolutely cannot." I gave a polite smile, but inside I felt a cold ripple. People terrified of losing reputation usually have something big to hide. Sharon never once met my eyes that night. Alyssa rarely looked comfortable when family finances came up, and the expensive items around the house looked unused, too new. Everything felt like a stage set. As dinner ended, Harold lifted his glass. "My family has protected our name for generations. I hope this marriage does not disappoint us." I heard it loud and clear, a warning, and in that moment I knew the Hart family was not perfect. They only tried to look perfect, and that kind of perfection always hides something. I left that night with a certainty. Something was very wrong, and if I didn't uncover it soon, my son would be the one paying the price. Dinner with both families, the official meeting, was scheduled a few weeks later. Nathan was excited, convinced this was a step toward unity. I didn't want to dampen his joy, so I agreed, though my heart felt heavier with every passing day. The dinner was hosted at an upscale Italian restaurant, the kind Harold described as worthy of discussing the future. Nathan and I arrived first. I wore a beige sweater with an old blazer that had belonged to my late husband. Nathan complimented me, telling me not to worry, but the moment we stepped inside, my heartbeat quickened. Harold and Sharon arrived next, followed by Alyssa in a red dress that drew every eye in the room. Harold shook Nathan's hand, then shook mine with his typical performative smile. "Well, you look better tonight than the last time," he said, as if it were a compliment, but his tone sounded more like a judgment. I smiled politely. Refusing to react was the only way not to turn this dinner into a battlefield. As we sat down, Harold ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu without even glancing at the price. He told us about his busy day, board meetings, a new project inspection, contract negotiations. I noticed the way he talked about his work, as if the entire world revolved around him alone. Nathan sat up straight, trying to look mature and worthy, but I sensed the tension in his eyes. He knew tonight was going to be a test, and Harold was the examiner. He didn't wait long. The appetizers had barely been served when Harold leaned forward, placed both hands on the table, and stared straight at Nathan. "So, Nathan, I want to know your income." No sugarcoating, no warm-up, just a bare, wallet-stripping question. Nathan froze. Alyssa turned to her father and said softly, "Dad, not now." Harold raised his hand to silence her. "I have the right to know. My daughter is about to marry him. I need to know whether he can provide the life she deserves. We'll build everything together," Nathan said, his voice small but firm. Harold laughed. "Build? You're renting a place. Your income barely covers your rent. What kind of life can you give Alyssa?" The room seemed to dim a little. I saw my son lower his head, his hands clasped together, just like when he was a child, every time he got a bad grade and was afraid I'd be disappointed. Alyssa sat beside him, staring down at her plate, lips pressed tightly together. She didn't defend Nathan, Not one word, not even a gentle squeeze of his hand. My chest burned, not from shame, but from love for my child. I rested my hand lightly on Nathan's, then turned to Harold. I don't think Nathan's job is the most important thing. What matters is that they love each other and respect each other, I said, keeping my voice calm. Harold raised an eyebrow. Respect? May I be honest, Marjorie? You sound a little, idealistic. I smiled just as lightly as he had mocked me. And you sound a little, harsh. Harold let out a laugh, one with no warmth at all. Being harsh means being realistic. Alyssa was raised in a different environment. I don't want her to suffer. I replied, who said loving Nathan means suffering? He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Many people don't realize they're suffering until it's too late. I'm just protecting my daughter. I stayed silent, but inside, everything felt like it was spinning. I was not used to being looked down on by anyone. But what hurt more was watching this man crush my son just to prove he was more powerful. I suddenly remembered what he said at the mansion. My family's reputation cannot afford a single crack. Tonight he was using that reputation to humiliate others, a reputation I was beginning to suspect wasn't real. Nathan tried to salvage the dinner by talking about his job and the projects he was working on, but Harold only nodded indifferently, occasionally hurling sharp questions like tiny needles. Do you plan to buy a house? How much savings do you have? Do you think you have the backbone to protect a family? Nathan answered each question quietly, but I could feel the deep hurt behind every word. Alyssa stayed silent. Completely silent. She didn't comfort Nathan, didn't defend him. She looked frozen. Or worse, afraid to go against her father. Dinner dragged on awkwardly. I kept my face composed, but my heart broke a little every time I looked at Nathan. When the main course was served, Harold continued, You say you love Alyssa, but love isn't enough, Nathan. Not enough. I set my utensils down. Mr. Hart, I said, my voice so steady even I was surprised. I understand your worry for your daughter. We all worry for our children, but my son is a decent man, and decency is valuable. Harold smirked. Decency doesn't buy a good life. I looked straight into his eyes, but it helps people live a better one. He went silent for a second. Then he let out a half laugh, half sneer. I hope you truly believe that. I didn't respond because at that moment I understood exactly what kind of man Harold was. Someone who stepped on others so he could see himself as taller. He saw Nathan as a temporary choice, as if my son wasn't worthy of climbing the golden staircase he built around his family. When dinner ended, Nathan walked Alyssa to her car. I stayed behind to get my coat. Harold approached me, keeping just enough distance to avoid seeming impolite. I didn't say those things to insult you, he said quietly. I said them as a warning. Your son is not worthy of my daughter. I looked at him for a long time. I wanted to say something sharp, something fierce, but in the end I simply said, You underestimate people too easily, Harold. He shrugged. Or you overestimate them. I turned away, but in that moment something cold and determined slid through me. I knew exactly what I needed to do. That night when Nathan drove me home, he spoke very little. I knew he was ashamed, hurt, feeling small under that man's judgment. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder, afraid of hurting him more. You don't need to prove anything to him, I said. You just need to live true to yourself. Nathan nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully hear me. He hadn't lost to Harold tonight. He had lost to his own fear. When he drove away, I stood on the porch watching the taillights disappear, and I whispered, "You are not walking into a marriage of humiliation. I promise you that." But promises weren't enough. I needed truth. I needed proof of who Harold really was. I needed something Nathan couldn't ignore. From that night on, I wrote down every expression, every comment, every glance Harold made. Every small detail could become a puzzle piece, and the more I recorded, the more cracks I saw in the perfect, wealthy story he had built. What I didn't know yet was that those cracks would lead to a massive secret, one that would tear the Hart family apart on the very day they thought their power was untouchable. In the days after that disastrous dinner, a dull feeling pulsed inside me like a tiny needle pressing into the palm, light but persistent, impossible to ignore. I tried to stay normal around Nathan, not wanting to add pressure, but the image of Harold, his cold eyes, his cutting words, replayed endlessly. A man like that could not be as flawless as the mask he wore. And then, one Friday afternoon, as I parked near the North Scottsdale shopping center to buy baking supplies, I happened to see something I still believe fate placed in front of me. Harold's glossy black SUV was parked in a far corner of the lot, where few cars passed. I recognized the license plate immediately. I'd seen it enough times at the Hart mansion. At first, I thought he was just shopping. But when he stepped out, something was off. He no longer wore his usual smug expression. He kept looking around nervously, as if afraid someone was watching. I leaned slightly in my seat, staying hidden. A minute later, a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, walked toward him. She was naturally beautiful, simply dressed. Beside her were two children, a boy around 8 and a girl around 6, and both children called Harold Dad. I felt my heart drop to the floor of the car. The little girl ran to him, hugging his leg. Harold bent down, stroked her hair with the same hand that had once shaken mine with arrogance. The young woman smiled anxiously and said something quietly. Harold pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. They exchanged hushed words, their eyes darting around. Just watching them, I knew they weren't distant relatives. I didn't have experience with other people's family drama, but I had lived long enough to recognize what I was looking at. This was not a coincidence. This was a family. When Harold turned and accidentally spotted me, his face drained of color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He shoved the children into the SUV, almost too quickly, urged the woman into the front seat, and within seconds the car peeled away, tires almost lifting dust off the pavement. I stood still for a long time, chest tight with anger. How rotten could a man be? How far could someone go with lies just to look respectable? When I finally entered the store, my hands still trembled. That evening, I called Alyssa. I didn't want to confront her. Not yet, but I wanted to hear her reaction. She sounded cheerful at first, but when I casually mentioned Harold and asked what he'd been doing that afternoon, she fell silent. "Oh, he must have seen, a cousin," Alyssa said, her voice shaking so noticeably I heard it even through the phone. "One of his cousins just came back to town." I closed my eyes. The first lie someone tells when they're cornered is always the worst. I didn't push her. I thanked her and ended the call. But from that moment on, I knew I had stepped into a secret too big for their family to hide behind silence. That night, I opened my late husband's old notebook, the one he used for work, and wrote, day, month, year. Harold Hart has a second family. The next morning, I went to private investigator Caleb Morton's office. Caleb was in his mid-50s, solid build, weathered face, sharp but kind eyes. He had helped me once in a land dispute years ago. He wasn't a man of unnecessary words. When I told him everything, Caleb crossed his arms and listened without interrupting. He only raised his eyebrows when I mentioned the 2 children calling Harold Dad. "I need the truth," I said, fingers entwined. "Not to destroy Alyssa's life, but to save my son before he gets pulled into a family built on lies." Caleb nodded. "I understand. But I want everything to be legal, clear. I want proof, and I want it fast, before the wedding." He opened his notebook and jotted down a few lines. "I'll tail him for 2 weeks. His schedule, where he goes, who he meets. If there's something off, you'll know." I exhaled, part of a heavy weight lifting from my chest. Caleb never made empty promises. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 months. I tried to stay normal around Nathan, cooking for him, chatting about his work, and I avoided mentioning Alyssa or the Harts. But when he left the house, I would sit by the window, watching the street, a quiet fire burning in me. Harold remained perfect on social media. Sharon kept posting elegant dinners. Alyssa kept smiling every time Nathan brought her to visit. But now, I saw the truth behind the pictures. Some secrets are so big that people must perform a lifelong play to hide them. On day 12, Caleb called. "Mrs. Lane," he said, his voice low, "I think you should come to the office." I knew that tone. It wasn't good news. When I arrived, Caleb placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were photos of Harold with the woman I had seen, and with the 2 children, photos of them at the park, eating dinner, walking the kids to school. Not acquaintances, a real family. Caleb flipped to another page. Bank transfers, purchases, tuition payments, all funded from an account tied to Hart & Sons. "He's had a second family for 8 years, Caleb said, and he's supporting them entirely with company money." My breath hitched. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Caleb continued. "There are unexplained withdrawals from several construction projects. I can't confirm the full legal implications yet, but..." He pushed the financial report toward me. "The gaps are huge." I opened each page, my hands trembling slightly. The numbers, the shady line items, the strange notes. They all came together into one clear picture. Harold wasn't just deceiving his wife and children. He was deceiving the company, the shareholders, and everyone who believed he was an honest businessman. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the small office spin around me. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm all right. I was prepared for this. It just still hurts a little." Caleb nodded. I closed the file. Looking at it on the table felt like staring at a fire ant nest. Touch it once, and the whole swarm would come pouring out and tear everything apart. I knew from that moment on, I had stepped into a battle far bigger than anything I ever imagined. But I also knew something else, more clearly than ever. I would not let my son walk into a marriage tied to a family built on lies. Caleb's file sat in front of me the entire evening like a stone pressing against my chest. I read every page, every number, every little scribble he had marked in red. Each line was a blade slicing into the perfect image Harold always tried to present. The same image my son was preparing to step into with blind trust. I had thought Harold having a second family was the lowest form of betrayal. But when Caleb expanded his investigation, I realized I had only seen the tip of a massive iceberg. The next morning, I went back to Caleb's office. As soon as he saw me, he stood, opened a drawer, and took out another thicker stack of documents. "Mrs. Lane," he said, his voice low and heavy, "I'm afraid things are even worse than we expected." I tightened my grip on my purse, my heart pounding. How bad? Caleb didn't answer immediately. He handed me a financial statement covered in numbers. Hart & Sons has hidden debts in the tens of millions of dollars. I almost couldn't believe my ears. But Harold said his company was growing. That's exactly the problem, Caleb cut in. He lied, or more precisely, he's been surviving on layers of forged documents, fake contracts, and highly sophisticated financial manipulation. My legs lost strength as I sank into the chair. Caleb opened page after page. Project accounts drained with no explanation. Funds transferred to a shell company under the young woman's name. The remaining money funneled into high-risk investments to make up the losses, which failed miserably. Where did he get the money? I asked, though the answer was already crystal clear. Caleb looked at me with sad eyes. From the low-income housing project, a large portion was siphoned off to support the second family. I inhaled sharply, not from shock, but from pure outrage. I wasn't someone who cried easily, but knowing poor families lost their homes because Harold wanted to live two lives, it hurt in a different way. What did he do to the project? I asked. Caleb placed a set of photos in front of me. Unfinished buildings, cracked brick walls, incomplete roofs, pipes propped up temporarily. They reported 100 completed units, Caleb said. In reality, they've built fewer than 40, and the quality is terrible. My hands trembled as I turned to the next page. Fake documents, Caleb continued. Inflated material costs, contractor swaps for kickbacks. Some workers haven't been paid for months. I met 3 of them. All said Harold threatened to sue them if they spoke up. I leaned back, holding my head with both hands. Each detail was a hammer blow, heavier than the last. Has anyone tried to sue? I asked. Yes, Caleb replied, but they were intimidated. Harold has cousins in major banks and friends on the city council. He knows exactly who to use to keep mouths shut. I stayed silent. A man with 2 families was bad enough. But a man who stole millions of dollars from housing for the poor, withheld wages from workers, and threatened victims, that was beyond betrayal. That was a crime. Caleb placed one hand gently on the table. I know what you're thinking. I looked up. Do you? He nodded. You're wondering if you should expose him. You're thinking about Nathan and Alyssa, too. I bit my lip. Alyssa doesn't know about this, does she? I don't believe she knows everything. Maybe a little, but certainly not the full scale. I closed my eyes. Alyssa's face flashed in my mind. The way she sat silent while Nathan was humiliated at dinner. The shaky lie about cousins. Her inability to stand up to Harold even once. I didn't hate Alyssa, but I wasn't naive enough to believe she was strong enough to survive the storm that would follow. If this exploded, she would be the first to be swept away. Caleb said, You should understand, if you bring him down, it won't just be a scandal. It'll blow up across the entire city. I opened my eyes. I don't want revenge, Caleb. I don't want to be a hero. I just want to save my son before he ties his life to a family built on lies. If they marry, Nathan will sink with him. Caleb studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then what you need is timing. I asked softly, What timing? The moment when the truth destroys him the most, the moment when the whole world is watching him. I understood immediately. The wedding. The day Harold Hart wanted to flaunt his reputation, his family, his power. The day he believed everything was his. Respect, admiration, control. If the truth came out on that day, it wouldn't just crack his mask, He would destroy himself in front of everyone he sought to impress. I stood, thanked Caleb, and held the file to my chest like a ticking bomb. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in the old chair by the window, the one my husband used to sit in when he read the newspaper, and watched the streetlights reflect on the grass outside. The cool Arizona night air slipped through the window crack, but I still felt warm. I thought about Nathan, about how he lowered his head before Harold at dinner, about how he wanted to be stronger so he could deserve Alyssa, about the future he was chasing, a future he didn't know was built on deception. I touched the edge of the file. So many numbers, so much evidence, so many voices, enough to destroy Harold and save my son. But I also knew, once I took this step, there would be no turning back. The next day, when Nathan stopped by to grab his suit for a fitting, he wore a smile I hadn't seen since the dinner with the in-laws. "Mom, things are getting better," he said. "Harold, well, Alyssa's dad, seems to be trying to accept me." I looked into his eyes, those hopeful eyes too pure to see what I had seen. "Nathan," I asked softly, "are you truly happy?" He smiled. "I have Alyssa. That's enough." I didn't say another word. I couldn't. If I spoke, I would have had to tell him everything, and the time for that hadn't come. When he drove away, I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered, "My son, I will protect you, even if it means shattering that man's perfect facade." I looked at the file one last time before closing it. That night, I understood one thing clearly. If I wanted to save Nathan, I had to let Harold collapse under the weight of his own secrets. And the wedding would be the place where he would bow before the truth. After that tense dinner with the in-laws, I could feel Nathan slowly drifting away from me. Not because he wanted to, but because something thin and fog-like had formed between us, something Alyssa had woven so softly that Nathan couldn't feel it, but I could see it clearly. Nathan still visited me every week, but instead of stepping inside with his usual warm smile, he now lingered at the doorway, as if weighing something before speaking. His words began to change, sharper, more sensitive, and sometimes hurtful in a way I never imagined he could be. One afternoon, when he came by to pick up a jacket I had washed, his face looked more strained than usual. I invited him in, but he stood in the middle of the living room, hands in his pockets, staring at the carpet as if the words he carried were too heavy. "Mom," he began, quiet but firm, "Alyssa said, 'You're not happy about her family.'" I set my teacup down. I had braced myself for this conversation, but when it actually arrived, my chest tightened. "Son," I said gently, "I just want you to be happy." Nathan sighed, then lifted his eyes to mine. "Alyssa said you're jealous." My heart sank, not because of the accusation, but because Nathan believed it enough to repeat it. "Jealous of what?" I asked calmly. "Jealous that her family is wealthier, that they have more." He paused, then added, "Alyssa said you don't like her because she comes from a better background." I let out a faint laugh, not of amusement, but of disbelief that such an idea could exist. "Nathan," I said, "I've lived long enough to know what's worth envying and what isn't. A wealthy family isn't on my list." But Nathan shook his head, as if my words couldn't reach him. "Then why do you always get upset when Harold is mentioned?" he asked. I wanted to say, "Because Harold is a liar, a betrayer, and a dangerous man." I wanted to open the safe, pull out every document and photo Caleb had collected, but I couldn't. Not then. Not before the right moment. Because I'm afraid someone will hurt you, I said instead. Nathan looked at me. For a brief second, tenderness flickered in his eyes, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by the unfamiliar coldness I had been seeing lately. Alyssa said you don't respect her dad, he continued. She said you look down on his success. I stayed silent. And isn't that true? Nathan's voice trembled slightly. Maybe he didn't want to say it, but he did. I didn't feel angry, just deeply hurt, the kind of hurt that sinks through bone. When your child begins to see you through someone else's eyes, you finally understand what it means to lose a child without anyone stealing them from you. I stood, placed my hand on Nathan's shoulder. Son, I said slowly, I don't look down on anyone, but I have eyes. I see things you don't yet see. I just want you to think carefully about this marriage. He gently brushed my hand off his shoulder instinctively. Mom, can't you just accept Alyssa? I swallowed the ache in my throat. I can accept anyone who makes you happy, I said, as long as they treat you well, as long as their family doesn't make you feel small. Nathan frowned. That's your view, Mom, not mine. I didn't respond, because I knew the more I spoke, the more he would think I was against Alyssa. And that was the last thing I wanted before the truth came out. When Nathan left, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the tree-lined street. I placed a hand over my heart, feeling it race with fear. Fear of losing him. Fear that the truth would come too late. Fear that he saw me as controlling or selfish. Fear that he would marry into an illusion and one day pay for it with his whole life. Sometimes motherhood isn't pulling your child into your arms. It's watching them walk toward a mistake and waiting for the exact moment to pull them back before they fall off a cliff. That night, I went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and took out the small safe I kept under the spare blanket. I placed it on the bed and slowly unlocked it. Inside were the 3 brown envelopes I had been preparing for days. One envelope had Nathan's name on it. One envelope had Alyssa's name. One envelope had Sharon Hart's. Each envelope was thick with papers, photos, financial records, and construction reports Caleb had quietly collected. I had printed every document, labeled each page clearly. Everything inside was the truth. The truth Harold had been hiding behind layers of power and money. I touched the envelope with my son's name a little longer. Inside, it was everything he needed to know so he wouldn't be buried under the rubble Harold was building with his dirty hands. I wanted to tell him right away, but I knew if I gave him this envelope too early, he would think I was trying to ruin the wedding. If I gave it too late, his life could be crushed. The right timing. That was what Caleb reminded me. The right timing. That was what I repeated to myself every day. A few days later, Alyssa texted me, I hope you understand I never meant to make Nathan drift away from you. I stared at that sentence and felt my heart turn cold, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. Alyssa didn't want a war, but she wanted Nathan to belong to her family, entirely, without ties, and Harold wanted that too. That was when I understood the real meaning of the fear of losing a child. It's not someone ripping your child from your arms. It's when they make your child believe another embrace is softer, safer. I folded my phone shut and breathed deeply. I couldn't blame Alyssa completely. She grew up in a world where family prestige mattered more than truth. Love was often defined by how well you obeyed. And Harold, he had taught her that. And Nathan? He loved. He was blind. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted to be a good man in Alyssa's eyes. But to do that, he was unknowingly drifting further and further away from me. I reminded myself, wait, Marjorie, wait for the right moment. The night before the wedding rehearsal, I opened the safe again. I took out the 3 envelopes and checked them one last time. Photos of Harold holding the 2 children. Video of Harold transferring money into the shell company account. Fake financial reports. The list of underpaid workers. Photos of the unfinished low-income units that were reported as completed. I organized everything neatly and put it back into the safe. I knew. One day soon, Harold would have to face all of this in front of his own family, and no one would be able to save him from the truth. I closed the safe, pushed it deep under the closet shelf, and covered it with a blanket. I turned off the light and walked into the living room, where the glow from the street lamp stretched my shadow across the floor. I looked at that shadow and whispered, "The wedding won't be peaceful, Harold Hart, and I'll be there. I won't let my son be buried under your fake reputation." I sat down on the chair, stretched my arms, and exhaled slowly. Outside, the night wind rustled through the old oak trees in the yard. It was a quiet evening, but inside me, a storm waited for its hour to rise. I prepared myself for everything, for the collapse, for the tears, for the anger, for the panic, for even the bitter laugh Harold wouldn't be able to force out once his mask fell. I wasn't seeking victory. I wasn't seeking revenge. I only wanted one thing, to save my son, before it was too late. Nathan visited me on the afternoon before the wedding. I had just put a batch of pastries in the oven when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was my son's smile, a smile so wide it felt like it lit up the hallway. Nathan wore a white shirt, khaki pants, his hair neatly trimmed, and his eyes glowing with a pure happiness I hadn't seen in a long time. "Mom," Nathan said, opening his arms and hugging me, "tomorrow will be the best day of my life." I hugged him back, but my hands trembled. I tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "I'm happy for you, Nathan." But my heart felt squeezed tight, because I knew what Nathan didn't. I knew the truth, the kind of truth that would break him if he learned it tonight. Nathan walked into the kitchen, sat down, and took a deep breath as if he needed courage to say something. "Mom," he said, "I want you to really be happy for me. I want tomorrow to be perfect." I opened the oven and set the tray of pastries on the counter to cool. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the kitchen. The scent of his childhood, of Christmas mornings, of school days when I woke early to bake for him. "I always want you to be whole," I said. "But son, marriage isn't just love. It's family, and you should think carefully about the family you're walking into." I didn't say it to ruin his wedding. I said it because I was his mother. I said it because my heart hurt too much not to. Nathan leaned back in his chair, hands rubbing his temples. "Mom, you're starting again," he muttered, "again with the Hart family." I turned around and looked right into his eyes. The eyes I once wiped tears from, the eyes I watched grow up, the eyes that lit up when he achieved his first dream. "I'm not starting anything," I said softly. "I'm worried." Nathan shook his head, giving a small, strained smile. Not the warm one he arrived with. "What is there to worry about, Mom? I love Alyssa. She loves me. Her family might be a little strict, but that doesn't matter." I asked the question I had carried in my heart for months. "Are you sure they see you as part of their family?" Nathan looked up, his expression briefly annoyed. "You're prejudiced against them." I stood still. I didn't want to argue, not tonight. But that sentence pierced me. not because it was harsh, but because it carried the tone of Harold, and that frightened me more than any of the financial evidence Caleb had uncovered. I walked closer and placed a hand on my son's shoulder. "Nathan," I said slowly, "I'm not prejudiced. I have experience. I have eyes, and I see what you don't yet see." He looked away. When he looked back, there was a layer of defensiveness in his gaze I had never seen before. "You don't know them the way I do," he said. "I spend more time with them than you. They're not as bad as you think. You're just worrying too much." I didn't argue. I didn't say Harold was a liar. I didn't say Heart and Sons was drowning in debt. I didn't say Alyssa was being manipulated by her own father. I didn't say anything I knew, because if I did, tonight would destroy Nathan, not Harold. I simply looked at my son for a long time, so long that he lowered his head slightly, as if he could feel the sadness in my eyes. "Mom," he whispered, I love you, but I also have to live my own life." I nodded. "And I want you to live that life in real happiness, not inside a glossy wrapper someone else created." He sighed again, a long sigh that felt like every cell in his body was being stretched thin. "Tomorrow, just come, okay?" he said. "I want you there." I placed my hand on his cheek. "No matter what happens, I'll always be there. Always." Nathan smiled, a smile that made my heart ache and warm at the same time. Then he left, saying he needed to go help Alyssa with the rehearsal. When the door closed, the house fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes your chest shake. I stood leaning against the kitchen counter, both hands over my heart, trying to breathe. Tonight, I knew I wouldn't sleep. When the streetlights flicked on, I opened the safe again. The 3 envelopes lay there. 3 truths that would change the fate of the entire Hart family. I placed them on the dining table, turned on the lamp, and began checking each envelope. In Nathan's envelope, photos of Harold holding the 2 children, bank statements showing he funded them with company money, video of him meeting the young woman in the parking lot, reports of the unfinished housing project. In Alyssa's envelope, the truth about the father she idolized, written more gently, with a note telling her she wasn't at fault, but she needed to know who she was defending. In Sharon's envelope, financial documents, proof Harold created a private fund under another woman's name, statements showing he withdrew money from their joint account. I added a few small notes to each file. Short explanations, easy to understand, so no one could misinterpret anything. I made sure everything was clear, organized, and factual. By the time I finished, the clock struck 11 at night. The lamp cast a warm glow on the pages, making them look almost golden, not because of the light, but because of the weight of the truth inside them. I remembered Caleb's words. To make him expose himself, you need a big stage. And tomorrow, I would have a ballroom of 200 people. Tomorrow, Harold would think he was at the peak of his reputation. Tomorrow, the entire city would be watching the Hart family, and tomorrow the mask he had worn for years would fall. I gathered the envelopes and placed them carefully into my purse. I touched the purse, thinking about how it now carried the fate of so many people, Nathan, Alyssa, and even Sharon. I turned off the lamp, letting the kitchen sink into the gentle darkness of the Arizona night. When I stepped into the living room, I paused at the window, looking at the sky sprinkled with tiny stars. I whispered, almost to myself, "Tomorrow, son, I'll protect you, and no one will stop me." I stood there a little longer, letting my fear and determination blend together. Tomorrow was the wedding. But for me, tomorrow would be a battle. The wedding took place under the bright golden Arizona sun, the kind of sunlight people get used to here, but today it felt harsher than ever. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I needed time to breathe and steady myself before facing a family teetering on the edge of a cliff they didn't know they were standing on. The hotel ballroom was decorated beautifully. Crisp white tablecloths, flickering candles, rows of pure white lilies lining the tables. Everything was perfect. Perfect in the exact way Harold always imagined. I sat at my assigned seat at the third table, not too far from the stage, but not close enough to be the center of anything. Nathan appeared soon after, wearing a charcoal gray suit and a navy tie I had given him months ago. His face glowed with excitement, though a hint of nerves lingered. When our eyes met, he smiled. That gentle, honest smile I adored. Good, I thought. My son deserves happiness, but not the kind built on lies. The ceremony passed gently, warmly, almost making me forget everything I had prepared. But that moment didn't last. After Nathan and Alyssa exchanged vows, the wedding music soared through the applause. I tried to stay calm, but my hand quietly gripped the edge of the table. Then came the toasts, the part Harold had rehearsed as if it were a performance. He stepped onto the stage amid applause, his tuxedo sharp, his smile practiced, his eyes full of arrogance. He swirled a champagne glass and looked over the ballroom with triumph. Many of you here know, Harold began, that the Hart family has always maintained high standards of honor and class. My heart sank. His voice dripped with poison. And today, he continued, I am proud that my daughter is entering a marriage we have carefully considered. I saw Nathan stiffen. Alyssa glanced at her father, confused, but Harold kept going, his tone as sharp as a blade. To be honest, Harold said, lifting his glass and locking eyes with me as if issuing a challenge, our family has standards, and Nathan, my new son-in-law, may not fully meet those standards yet. The ballroom fell silent. A few people gave polite, awkward laughs. My hand trembled once again. Nathan, he said, you're a good young man. I acknowledge that. But my daughter marrying you is a downgrade. I heard several people around me gasp sharply. Shannon, the bridesmaid, brought her hand to her mouth. Nathan looked as if someone had slapped him across the face. His expression drained and his lips trembled. I saw his shoulders pull inward, like a child being scolded in front of a classroom. Alyssa turned toward her father, ready to protest, but Harold raised his hand as if forbidding her to say a single word. I felt the blood rush to my face, not because he insulted me, I was used to that, but because he humiliated my son on the most important day of his life. And I knew the time had come. I stood up. No one had time to react. I walked quickly toward the stage, the sound of my heels crisp against the wooden floor, each step pushing me closer to a moment I could never undo. Harold saw me and widened his eyes. What are you doing? I yanked the microphone from his hand as the room fell into stunned silence. A few whispers rose. Some people stood halfway from their chairs as if anticipating a scene no one dared imagine. I took a deep breath, and I began. I'm sorry for interrupting, I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding like a drum. But if Mr. Hart has spoken honestly, then I believe it's time for me to do the same. Harold moved toward me to snatch the microphone back, but the sound technician had already muted his mic. That set him off. He barked, "Turn her mic off! Turn it off!" But no one moved, maybe because they didn't understand what was happening. Or maybe they wanted to see. I reached down to the small handbag sitting on the floor near the stage. I opened it and pulled out the thickest envelope, still sealed with my mark. "I have something here," I said. "A wedding gift for everyone, especially for my son, my future daughter-in-law, and Mrs. Sharon Hart." That name made Sharon lift her head. Even from a distance, I saw her go pale, as though she sensed disaster approaching. I opened the envelope. Inside were the photos Caleb had taken. I held one up toward the projector. "This," I said clearly, "is Harold Hart and his second family." The room erupted with noise. I pressed the remote the technician had slipped into my hand earlier, proof they had been prepared for this moment. The giant screen behind the stage lit up. Photo 1. Harold hugging a little girl with curly hair kissing her forehead. Photo 2. Him standing beside the young woman, his arm wrapped around her waist. Photo 3. The two children clutching his legs, mouths open as they called him Dad. A piercing scream broke out. It was Sharon. She collapsed onto her chair, hands trembling violently, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Alyssa burst into tears, stumbling backward as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Nathan stood frozen, his gaze torn apart between pain and disbelief. Harold lunged toward the projector, his face blazing red, shouting, "Stop! Turn it off! Are you all insane?" But the technicians, two young men who had likely endured Harold's barking during the rehearsal, didn't move. One exhaled and whispered, "Sorry, Mr. Hart. This is a valid request." Harold roared, "Valid! This is my daughter's wedding. You—" I continued, my voice steady and strong. "And here are the withdrawal records." The receipts appeared on the screen. Detailed transfers, the shell company account, secret payments for Family M, the young woman's name. Then, the video of Harold meeting the woman in the parking lot, him bending down to lift the child, him glancing around nervously, him kissing the child's hair. The ballroom froze. No one laughed. No one breathed loudly. Everyone simply stared at Harold, at the truth, at the falling mask. Harold spiraled into panic. He rushed at me and ripped the microphone from my hand, but instead of speaking, he only opened his mouth silently. His lips trembled, his eyes bulged, his hair was disheveled, and his breathing came in ragged bursts. I could see the chaos inside him, the chaos of a man who knew he had been cornered. Harold stammered. I'm being framed. This is slander. But no one spoke in his defense. No one believed him. No one took his side. Alyssa sobbed and ran toward Nathan, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a whirlpool. Nathan, still shattered, held her out of instinct. Sharon collapsed onto the floor, her trembling hands gripping the table. A few people rushed to lift her, but her head kept shaking as if she couldn't accept the reality. The ballroom descended into chaos. Some people screamed. Some recorded on their phones. Some sprinted for the exits. Some stood frozen like stone statues. The clatter of falling glasses, scraping chairs, hurried footsteps, and sobs blended into a storm of sound, unlike anything I had heard at a celebration. But through it all, I stood still. Not because I was calm, but because I had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. The moment truth sliced through Harold Hart's golden mask. The moment he couldn't hide behind money, power, or his voice. The moment everyone in the ballroom saw him exactly as he was. A liar, a hypocrite, and a cruel man. And finally, the moment I could look my son in the eye and say, "Do you see now, Nathan? This is the truth I wanted you to know." Harold left the stage like a man whose world had collapsed beneath him. He stumbled between tables, stepping on tablecloths and knocking over a flower vase nearly 3 feet tall. His shouts blended with Alyssa's cries, Sharon's frantic calls, and the murmurs of stunned guests, forming a chaos beyond description. I watched Harold burst through the ballroom doors. 2 security guards tried to stop him, but he shoved them aside and disappeared. Seconds later, I heard camera shutters clicking. Reporters were already waiting in the hallway, as if Harold's downfall had been destined. I stood on the stage, holding the muted microphone. I didn't regret anything, but my heart felt heavy, like a stone sat on it. Not because of Harold, but because of Nathan. When I turned around, I saw my son standing in the middle of the ballroom like a man lost in a blizzard. His face was drained, his lips trembled, and his eyes looked as if something he believed in for months had just died. Mom. Nathan stepped toward me, his voice trembling. Why did you do this? Why did you ruin my life? It felt like someone had sucked the air out of my lungs. Some words, even without malice, cut like knives. This was one of them. I didn't answer immediately. I gently touched his hand, but he pulled away, a reflex that shattered my heart. Nathan, I whispered, I didn't ruin your life. I saved it. That's a lie, Nathan shouted, a cry filled more with despair than anger. You humiliated my family. You exposed everything in front of everyone. I can't bear this. You can't bear it because you don't know everything yet. I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope with Nathan's name. Read it. Read all of it before you blame me. Nathan stood frozen, hesitant to take it, but Alyssa, her face soaked with tears, stepped closer and touched his arm. Nathan, you should read it. Her voice was so shaky it was almost a whisper. I looked at her. For the first time, her eyes held no trace of the overconfidence typical of the Hart family, only fear, loss, and realization. Nathan took the envelope with trembling hands. He opened it and pulled out the pages. I watched his eyes shift from surprise to confusion to complete collapse. Why? His voice was so faint I had to lean in to hear. Why did he use my name to withdraw the money? I swallowed the bitter knot in my throat. Harold, eager to build the image of the wonderful father, had made Nathan sign a series of symbolic forms, which Nathan believed were nothing more than routine paperwork. But in Caleb's files, those signatures had been used by Harold to legitimize several suspicious expenses. Nathan, I said as gently as possible, he didn't ask for your signature because he trusted you. He needed you as cover. Nathan dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. Alyssa knelt beside him. I didn't know anything. If I had known... I placed my hand on her shoulder, something I never imagined myself doing a few weeks ago. You're a victim too, Alyssa. She cried harder. Meanwhile, Sharon was carried out of the room, but she hadn't lost consciousness. Her eyes remained open, watching me through her tears. When I approached, she reached out and gripped my hand. Thank you, Sharon whispered. Thank you for saving my children and me. Her voice was barely there, but the gratitude in it was heavy. I squeezed her hand gently, saying nothing, because no words could ease what she was going through. Reporters flooded into the ballroom. Headlines flashed on guests' phone screens. Powerful businessman Harold Hart flees daughter's wedding. Leaked photos. Does Hart have a second family? Financial misconduct suspected at Hart & Sons. And I knew, in less than 24 hours, the entire city of Scottsdale would be talking about this. In less than 48 hours, all of Arizona would know. And in less than 72 hours, the Hart family would fall. Nathan stayed seated, silent like the shadow of himself. I sat beside him, not touching him, just close enough so he knew I was there. "Nathan," I said, "I know this is unbearable, but you must understand, I didn't do this to beat anyone. I did this so you wouldn't get pulled into Harold's crimes." "He used me," Nathan said, his voice cracked. "He wanted me to be his shield." I nodded. "Because you're the only decent person in that family." Nathan broke down crying, the quiet, painful cry of a grown man whose heart had cracked open. I pulled my son into my arms, letting him cry the way he once did when he fell off his bike in the front yard. "I have nothing left," he whispered. "That's not true." I held his face in my hands. "You have me, and you have the truth." Alyssa stood, wiping her tears. Her face was pale, but there was a new clarity in her eyes, the kind that only deep pain can create. "Mrs. Lane," she said, "I'm sorry. I thought you hated me. But now I understand you were trying to protect Nathan." I placed my hand on Alyssa's shoulder. "You were never the problem. The fault lies with the man who taught you how to see the world." Alyssa lowered her head. "I don't know what tomorrow will be like, but I do know this. Thank you for showing me the truth before it was too late." That night, the police went to Harold's house. They didn't arrest him, not yet, but they seized several documents. I knew because Caleb messaged me a little after 11 p.m. "The evidence you provided has reached the right people. The formal investigation has begun." The next morning, the news published. Harold Hart under investigation for financial fraud, embezzlement, forged records, and misuse of social project funds. By noon, 3 investors of Hart & Sons filed lawsuits. By late afternoon, a group of workers gathered in front of the company demanding their wages. And by the morning of the 3rd day, exactly 72 hours after the ruined wedding, the Hart & Sons headquarters building was officially sealed for investigation. The Hart family, once a symbol of Scottsdale's elite, became the center of the biggest scandal of the decade. Someone called me and asked if I felt satisfied. I simply answered, "No, I just feel relieved because the truth finally has its proper name." Nathan stayed at my house for 3 days straight, spending most of the time quietly lying in his room, holding on to his new reality. But each day he came out with less redness in his eyes and less trembling in his shoulders. Alyssa texted. Sharon sent her thanks. Many guests from the wedding called to apologize for laughing along with Harold, but to me, none of that mattered. The most important thing was that my son had escaped a path that would have dragged him into a bottomless pit. And I had kept my promise, a promise only a mother could fully understand. I will save you, even if I have to stand against the whole world. 3 days after the storm named Harold Hart, Nathan shut the door to the room in my house and only came out when he needed water. I didn't knock, didn't push, didn't question him. I had been a mother for more than 40 years, and I knew some pain must break on its own and mend on its own. No one else can touch it. But on the morning of the 4th day, while I was slicing apples in the kitchen, I heard hurried footsteps. I turned around and Nathan ran in and hugged me tightly, so tightly that I had to set the knife down and steady myself by holding his shoulders. "Mom?" His voice cracked right into my chest. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." I felt his whole body tremble, not from cold, but because he had finally let all his defenses fall. I placed my hand on his cheek, stroking it the way I used to when he was little, then pulled him into my arms. "You don't need to apologize," I whispered. "You just need to come back to yourself." Nathan stepped back slightly and wiped his tears with his sleeve. His eyes, for the first time in days, held a bit of light again. "I got swept up in their glamour, Mom. I kept thinking, that was the dream. That was the success I wanted to build." He paused for a moment, then sighed, as if he had just confessed the hardest truth. "But really, I felt like they were trying to reshape me to fit into their mold." I held his hand tightly. "You weren't wrong for loving. You were only wrong if you thought you had to lose yourself to be loved." Nathan bowed his head and slowly nodded. The next day, I received a message from Alyssa. Not long, not dramatic. "Mrs. Lane, if you don't mind, I'd like to meet you this afternoon." I agreed. We met at a small cafe on a corner of Camelback Road, where sunlight streamed through the windows, laying warm golden strips across the wooden tables. Alyssa arrived in a beige knit coat, her hair tied neatly, her face pale but without the arrogance she once carried. She sat across from me, her fingers intertwined, her gaze lowered as if she didn't yet have the courage to look at me directly. "How is your mother?" I asked. "My mom is still shocked," Alyssa answered, "but she's stronger than I thought." She said, "Maybe this is the best thing that's ever happened to me." I gave a small smile. Sharon, the woman who had always bowed under Harold's shadow, had finally stepped out of the invisible cage he built around her. Alyssa continued, "I'm sorry for ever thinking you disliked me. I didn't understand anything. I thought you just judged my family for not being good enough for Nathan." "Alyssa," I placed my hand over hers, "you were never the one I disliked. What I disliked was the lying." Alyssa nodded slightly, her eyes reddening. "I'm looking for a job now, any job. I don't want to live off my dad's money anymore, and I know things will be hard." "Hard is the right path," I said, "but you won't walk it alone." She looked up at me, startled. "Why would you help me after everything?" I smiled, the smile of a mother who has lived long enough to understand people. "Because you were deceived too. Because you also lost something. And most importantly, because you love Nathan, not the heart name." Alyssa lowered her head as tears rolled down her cheeks. That evening, I told Nathan, not to pressure him into any decision with Alyssa, but so he could understand that truth always has more sides than the pain he was carrying. Nathan sat on the sofa, his fingers interlocked, thinking for a long time. "I still love Alyssa," he said slowly, "but I'm afraid going back now would throw us right back into the same cycle." I nodded. "You're right. Both of you need time. I want to start over, not as husband and wife, but as two people trying to heal." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Then you're already more mature than you were before, Nathan." The following weeks passed with a completely new rhythm, a rhythm I never thought I would experience at my age. Nathan woke up earlier, took walks around the neighborhood each morning. When he got back, he often helped me in the kitchen making coffee or preparing a simple breakfast of eggs, toast, and fruit. Alyssa moved in with her mother. They rented a small apartment just enough for 2 bedrooms. Not luxurious, but peaceful and far brighter than the shadowed mansion Harold once ruled. She texted me every week, telling me about the job she found at a local clothing shop. Not fancy, but work she earned with her own hands. One afternoon, Alyssa came to my house to bring over some paperwork Nathan had left behind long ago. When I opened the door, she stood there with a soft smile, her face no longer wearing fear. "I want to help you cook dinner." She said it timidly but with determination, like A family. I looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time, I didn't see her as an extension of the Hart family. I saw her simply as herself. "All right," I said. "I could use an extra pair of hands." We washed vegetables, chopped onions, rinsed chicken, and talked about ordinary things women talk about while cooking. Rising grocery prices, a windy morning, stories of how Nathan was afraid of the dark when he was little. Nathan came home while we were making chicken soup. When he saw Alyssa in the kitchen, he paused. Not the kind of pause that comes from pain. The kind that comes from realizing hope might still exist. "Hey," Nathan said softly. "Hi," Alyssa replied, her hand slightly trembling but her eyes no longer avoiding his. I stood to the side, pretending to fuss with the pot, but my heart warmed. Not because they might get back together. I didn't know and didn't want to force it, but because I saw two young people learning how to rise from the wreckage. In late-night conversations, Nathan spoke more about the feeling of being manipulated. He didn't say it with self-blame. He spoke like someone looking directly at a wound so it could finally heal. "I thought I was strong," he said, "but I didn't understand that all I wanted was to feel valued, and Harold knew that." "Knowing you were once weak isn't shameful," I said. "What matters is you stood up." Nathan leaned back against the sofa and closed his eyes. "Mom, without you, I think I would have lost everything." I placed my hand over his. "No, you only lost what you never truly had." One evening near the end of summer, the three of us, me, Nathan, and Alyssa, sat down to dinner together. No commitments, no promises, no pressure. Just a simple meal among three people trying to heal. I looked at them and realized family isn't always made of marriage certificates or grand ceremonies. Sometimes family is simply the people who choose to sit together after the storm, even when they're still scared, still hurting, but they choose to stay. I knew the road ahead would be uneven. What happened to Harold the court would handle. What happened to Hart and Sons the investors would pursue. What happened to Nathan and Alyssa, time would decide. But I also knew this: justice sometimes comes at a painful cost, but it is a cost worth paying so the people you love can live truthfully. I stood up to clear the table, watching the two young people exchange small conversations, and my heart softened. I had fought. I had lost sleep. I had endured being misunderstood. But in the end, I saved my son. And I found peace again in this home. A peace not perfect, but true. A new beginning. Slow, humble, but full of hope. I always believed that time doesn't heal everything, but it reveals everything. For Harold Hart, that happened faster than anyone expected. Less than 2 months after the ruined wedding, the official trial began. The news spread across Arizona, showing Harold entering the courthouse in a wrinkled suit, his hair unkempt, his face worn as if he had aged 10 years. I didn't want to watch the whole trial. I already knew exactly what would be presented. As prosecutors listed the charges, I felt like I was hearing Caleb's notes read aloud one by one: embezzling community project funds, creating fake material records, financial fraud, falsifying data, using someone else's identity for unlawful withdrawals. Each accusation sounded like another nail in the coffin of the reputation Harold had built with a polished facade for decades. I looked around the courtroom. Many who once applauded Harold at public events now stared at the floor, unable to look up. Sharon didn't come. Alyssa didn't either. Nathan chose to stay home. Those Harold once threatened, workers, subcontractors, came in large numbers. They wanted to witness the moment the law finally called the truth by its name. Harold sat at the defendant's table, hands clenched together, It was the first time I'd seen him without his usual sense of authority. No sharpness in his eyes, no confident smile, no gold ring he loved to flaunt at gatherings. All that remained was a man being swallowed by the life he created. When the judge read the sentence, I saw Harold lean slightly forward, as if needing something to hold on to so he wouldn't collapse. Defendant Harold Hart is hereby sentenced, with total penalties and custodial time as prescribed by law. The sound of the gavel echoed like a bell closing an era built on lies. Reporters shot up from their seats. Cameras flashed nonstop. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt a heavy sadness. Some people dig their own graves with greed, but the saddest part isn't watching them fall. It's seeing the innocent get pulled down with them. A few days later, the prison clerk called me. "Mrs. Lane, Mrs. Hart. Oh, I mean, Mrs. Lane, the inmate Harold Hart is requesting to meet you." I hesitated. Since the wedding, I never imagined seeing him again. But I also knew nothing truly ends until the last questions are spoken. "I'll come," I said, "but I won't stay long." That afternoon, the Scottsdale wind was strong. I walked into the visitation room, surrounded by cold gray walls, the dim yellow lights making everything look tired and faded. When Harold was brought in, I went silent for a few seconds. The man in front of me was no longer the Harold Hart I once knew. The man who walked with elite confidence, wore watches worth thousands, and held his head high as if the world was beneath his feet. He wore an orange prison uniform and his hands still trembled slightly. When he saw me, Harold paused and lowered his head, something I never thought I would witness. "Mrs. Lane," he said, his voice hoarse and broken, "thank you for coming." I sat down and placed my handbag beside me. "I only have 15 minutes. Harold gave a faint, sad smile. "I won't keep you long." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once signed countless contracts and directed hundreds of employees, now trembling, frail like those of a sick old man. "Why did you do it?" he asked. No accusation, no anger, just the confusion of someone who no longer had anything to hold on to. I looked at him and answered slowly. "I didn't destroy you, Harold. I only brought the truth to light. You destroyed yourself." Harold closed his eyes for a long moment. His shoulders shook, the first time I had ever seen him cry. Not loud, not like the outburst at the wedding, just slow tears falling, heavy like drops of late regret. "I was too arrogant," he whispered. "I thought I could control everything. I thought reputation was everything." "And you lost everything to protect that," I replied softly. Harold nodded, lifting a hand to cover his face. "I lost 2 children, lost Sharon, lost Alyssa, and the second family, Hart and Sons. Everything." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "But what hurts the most is that I lost myself." I said nothing. Neither of us needed to add more blame. Life had spoken on our behalf. After a long while, he looked up at me, his eyes swollen and red. "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "I don't hate you, Harold. I'm only sad that greed turned you into someone you were never meant to become." He let out a crooked smile, then said, "If I hadn't met you that day, maybe I never would have been exposed." "I'm not the problem," I answered. "The problem is you lived too long on a lie." Harold nodded, as if he finally accepted what the rest of the world had realized long before him. When the prison officer stepped in to announce that time was up, Harold tried to speak quickly. "Mrs. Lane, if you ever see Nathan and Alyssa, tell them I'm sorry." I stood up and picked up my handbag. "I'll tell them," I said, "but whether they forgive you, that's their choice." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the ruin Harold had caused himself one more time. That was the last time in my life I ever saw him. When I stepped out of the prison building, the evening wind blew hard. The sky was strangely clear, as if the storm named Harold Hart had finally blown out of my life and out of the lives of those I loved. I stood on the steps and took a long breath. Not a breath of victory, but a breath of closure. A chapter had ended, a lesson had been completed, and justice, even painful justice, had finally been carried out. I walked toward the parking lot, the late afternoon sunlight warming my shoulders like a reminder. Truth always arrives, late or painful, but it comes to free the people who need to be freed, and I knew I had done the right thing. A year after Harold was sentenced, our lives had shifted into a different rhythm. Slower, steadier, and peaceful in a way I never believed I could have again. Scottsdale was still sunny, still full of desert winds in the evenings, but inside my small family, a new season had begun. Nathan and Alyssa decided to have a new wedding, not to compensate for the collapse of the first one, but to mark a true beginning, one not built on status, money, or empty praise. They chose a small church on the outskirts of town with light brown wooden beams and stained glass windows. It was the place where, the previous fall, Alyssa had spent hours sitting in silence, searching for her peace. This wedding didn't have 200 guests, no champagne poured into imported crystal, no arrogant smile from Harold, no judgmental glances from relatives, no whispers from people who only came to see who was richer. They invited only the people who truly mattered, those who stood by them during the hardest times, a few old friends of Nathan's, Alyssa's new co-workers, and the neighbors who supported me from the beginning. I stood inside the church, a light shawl across my shoulders, watching my son walk toward the altar. Nathan wore a simple navy suit, not expensive tailoring, but his eyes shone brighter than any gemstone. Alyssa followed behind, her white dress gentle as the breeze, her smile trembling yet innocent. No boasting, no insults, no looks of judgment, only love, pure and full. When they exchanged vows again, I felt each word sink deep into my heart. The first time they vowed before a world built on pretenses. This time, they vowed before their true selves. I stood nearby, quietly tearing up. For the first time in more than 2 years, I felt I had truly done the right thing. Right from the beginning, right in the deepest sense, right in a way that freed my heart. After the ceremony, we held a small outdoor reception behind the church. Just a few wooden tables, wild flowers in glass jars, a homemade wedding cake. Not grand, but beautiful in a way only sincerity can be. Alyssa held my hand and whispered, "Mrs. Lane, without you, I don't think I ever could have escaped that life." I gently patted the back of her hand. "No, you freed yourself. I only opened a door. You walked through it." Nathan came over and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Mom," he said, "I used to blame you, but now I'm proud to have a mother as brave as you." I laughed and tapped his arm lightly. "I'm not brave. I'm just a mother who knew her son deserved to live truthfully." Nathan pulled me into a hug, so different from the heavy hug after the storm first passed. This one was a hug of peace, of unconditional love. After the wedding, the three of us gradually settled into a new rhythm. Nathan joined a small but reputable construction company where he was valued for his real abilities. No more tense elite dinners, no more keeping up appearances to please anyone. Alyssa stayed with the job she found at the clothing store. They weren't wealthy, but she had a freedom she had never experienced before. Many evenings we ate together in my little kitchen. Alyssa shared stories about difficult customers. Nathan shared stories about funny coworkers. I listened, sometimes adding old memories, and my heart felt lighter. The things I had always wished for, honesty, peace, love without pretense, finally existed right in front of me. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sipping tea, Nathan suddenly said, "Mom, I think I finally understand what you always taught me. The truth, no matter how harsh, is what frees people." I looked at my son for a long moment. As long as you understand that, it's enough. And I know. Nathan continued, "The real value of a person isn't something anyone can trample on unless we allow it." I held his hand. Exactly. No one can take away your worth, not even those who once thought they had the right. Alyssa placed her hand on top of ours and smiled softly. We all learned that in the hardest way. Over the past year, I saw many people come and go from my life. Some came only to stand with me during a few stormy weeks. Some stayed and became new family. But no matter what, I realized something simple. When you live truthfully, when you refuse to bow to lies, the people who deserve you will find their way to you. I've lived most of my life already, but because of everything that happened, I feel like I just learned a new lesson. One that some people never fully understand. Peace doesn't fall from the sky. It's something you choose. You choose truth. You choose kindness. You choose to stand with what's right. And when you dare to choose, peace will come. As I share this story, I know one thing. You, the person reading or listening, have also faced unfairness at some point. Maybe not from a wealthy in-law family, but from people you loved who didn't understand your worth. If you've ever been looked down on, if you've ever been humiliated, if you've ever been pushed into the shadows because you didn't fit someone else's mold, then remember, your true worth cannot be taken. People can only make you forget it for a while. And once you reclaim it, as I reclaimed it for my son, you enter a whole new chapter of life, a chapter of peace, a chapter of truth, a chapter of your own. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. Thank you for giving your time, your heart, and your understanding to this journey. The journey of a mother, a woman growing older but never giving up. And if you are still here, reading these lines, I hope you will stay with me for the next stories I share. Where are you from? Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up and protect your own worth? Leave a comment. I would love to hear your story. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe so I can continue sharing real-life stories. Stories of ours, of people who may no longer be young, but still have so much to say. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart.